I simply want to express my delight and all of us at Boston College for having you here. I know you have been here in the past at least twice, and so you're gathered to talk about a very important topic, water, and how do we use it most wisely and efficiently. So it's great that you have come to Boston College. You provided wonderful weather for us. This is the last week of our classes, and then we move into exams. So we have many things happening on campus, and today and this week, we're even better off because we have all of you. So welcome and thank you for joining us at the Heights today.
Well, thank you, Father, and thank you, Jean Levesque. I think she was here. I saw her earlier for the use of the venue. Hi, Jean, the use of the venue. Thank you. I do want to recognize Marty Suberg from DEP. I know he's here today. Thank you, Marty. But first up is the opening remarks from Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Beth Card. Secretary Card oversees the Commonwealth's 6 environmental, natural resources, and energy regulation agencies. Prior to her appointment as secretary, she joined the Baker Polito administration as Undersecretary of Environmental Policy and Climate Resilience in the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, where she served as Chief Environmental Advisor to the Secretary and directed efforts to protect, preserve, and enhance the Commonwealth's environmental resources while ensuring a clean energy future for the state's residences. She also played a key role in advising on implementation of environmental justice initiatives for the Commonwealth. Secretary Card has more than 25 years of service in state agencies and quasi-government organizations, including MWRA and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, where she led environmental policy and regulatory programs. She received a BA in political science with a minor in environmental conservation and business administration from the University of New Hampshire and has a, has a JD from the Massachusetts School of Law. Beth.
Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here with all of you on this brisk Monday morning. On a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it feels a bit like being home, right? Seeing all of these familiar faces that I've worked so closely with over so many years. So it's really an honor to be here with all of you. I want to start by just offering on behalf of Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito my gratitude to all of the municipal officials who are here, but particularly our public water supply and wastewater service operators who have worked so hard every day to ensure that we have clean and safe drinking water for all of our citizens across the Commonwealth, as well as all of the work that you all do to protect our environment. It has been a challenging couple of years for all of us, but you are folks who 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, have been on call and on the clock, making sure that people of Massachusetts have what they need in terms of water supply. And so we're very, very grateful to all of you for the work that you do. We are at a period of time where we're facing some challenges, right? And these have been challenges that have been percolating a bit over the years. We have concerns associated with climate change, where we're experiencing more severe droughts than we ever have before, followed by peak wet weather events. And this makes it very difficult to manage not only our water and wastewater systems, but also to ensure that our environment is protected, that our environmental resources are thriving the way we need them to be, that our habitat and recreation opportunities are protected as well. And water supply and environmental advocacy are things that can all come together and work together. And I know I see so many partners from our watershed groups, Mass Rivers Alliance, Ipswich River Watershed Association, and many others that are here today. And we all have a role to play in this work. At the same time, we're also experiencing some water quality challenges. I don't have to tell you, you all know better than anyone, the concerns we're facing with PFAS. And this is something that our Department of Environmental Protection and Commissioner Suberg and his team are here, have been spending a lot of time focused on how do we best regulate PFAS, how do we mitigate the impacts, and what are some of the solutions for our public water suppliers as we deal with this challenge. So, you know, and of course, when we have these challenges and we're talking about water infrastructure, the issues of money always come up. And so how do we best finance the solutions to some of these challenges? And how are we dealing now with things like supply chain issues and resources demands, all of these things that can make things hard. But I'm more of a glass half full person than a glass half empty for sure. And so while we have all of these things that we're facing today, we also have an opportunity that is unlike anything that I've ever seen in terms of opportunities to address these challenges. But it's going to take some teamwork, but I think we have the right team all sitting here in this room or joining us from afar on the live stream today to help make things better. First, when we think about PFAS and some of the challenges that we have, we were very fortunate in Massachusetts over the last year to have the formation of a PFAS task force, and Representative Hogan co-chaired that task force with Senator Julian Cyr. And I think that was a great amount of work that we all had the opportunity to participate in, and also identified some key solutions, like looking at MWRA expansion and looking at alternative water supplies as one, as we think about public water supplies. On the North Shore, where we have some real worries from an environmental perspective, particularly in the Ipswich and in the Parker and others, there's been a team of folks thinking about this and working on this for many years. Senator Tarr is here, and his North Shore Resiliency Task Force and all of the work that the communities there are doing a great amount of work to identify what options we might have to make improvements on the North Shore. And certainly the MWRA is an opportunity to be part of that solution as well. When we look on the South Shore, we're thinking about how do we make sure that we have the water we need to spur and foster continued economic development. This is something that's important Commonwealth-wide, but I know of particular interest to our South Shore neighbors. I know we'll hear from Mayor Headland later today about his priorities in his town as we think about how do we bring water to the South. And then looking, of course, at all areas where we have some PFAS challenges, as I've mentioned, and how expansion may be an opportunity to help solve some of those challenges too. And really what's unusual about where we are at this point in time is the financial resources that we have available to us. When we think about opportunities like we've had in the Baker-Polito administration through ARPA dollars to identify earlier this year $100 million to support water and wastewater infrastructure needs. We have additional funds now through our recently passed economic development bill, where we have water and sewer infrastructure funds, as well as Mass Works grants that are available for communities as we start to think about solutions. We have federal partners now through the IIJA legislation, where there's additional funds to help support communities as they're dealing with lead service line replacements, for example, or PFAS and other water infrastructure needs. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's never been a time right like this moment where the stars are starting to align, money is starting to come into place. People are working together, solutions are being identified, information is available. We know what we need to do. We just need to figure out how to work together to make it happen. And I really do want to just say, as we commence this conversation through the course of today, I think you are the right people. I think we are the right people to be having this conversation. And so I encourage you to think big and think about what we can accomplish together. I'm very grateful for the work of the MWRA team for doing their studies on the North and South Shore that really help us answer the questions of, is there enough water? Yes. Do we know how to get it where it needs to go? Yes. Do we know how much it costs? Yes. Is it a lot? Yes. But can we work together to make it happen? Yes. Yes, we can. So I think we have we have great opportunities here to do all of that. I also really do want to thank and acknowledge Joe Favillaro and Matt Romero for your work in bringing us together. And the other, gosh, there's like 6 legs to this stool. I think, the other piece of that is the work that the advisory board together with the MWRA board of directors to make a big stride in waiving entrance fee to the MWRA system. This is a big deal, right? Communities have been concerned about entrance fee payment for a really long time, and being able to sort of cross that one off the list, I think warrants a great amount of thanks to the advisory board for their work and their leadership, and to the MWRA board of directors for their work as well, for working to see that through. So I'm glad to be here. I want to acknowledge Fred Lasky and his whole team for their work on the studies, Becky Weidman, who played a key role in doing this work, and just say, I think the table has been set quite nicely for a very important, timely conversation. And so I'm looking forward to spending a bit of time with you here today. I'm thankful for you for being here, and grateful for the hard work that you do every day, but that I know that you're going to continue to do. So thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation. Have a great day. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Beth? Well, she's no question. Okay. Okay, next up is we're going to talk about Forever Chemicals. Next up, we're going to talk about Forever Chemicals, the challenge PFAS proposes for communities. It's an overview of PFAS, the work of PFAS Interagency Task Force, and the results of the task force final report. Representative Kate Hogan is in her 7th term as state representative for the 3rd Middlesex District, representing the Central Massachusetts towns of Bolton, Hudson, Maynard, and Stowe. She was recently named Speaker Pro Tempore by Speaker Mariano in the past legislative session, and is currently the highest ranking LGBTQ member in the House. As a legislator, Representative Hogan has been tireless advocate for the building of Central Massachusetts regional economy, enhancing and improving our healthcare system statewide, and a voice for our elders, veterans, and the state's most vulnerable. Representative Hogan is also one of the Commonwealth's biggest leaders in addressing PFAS chemicals and emerging contaminants in our water supply. She recently co-chaired an interagency task force that investigated PFAS chemicals, studied their health impacts and statewide contamination, and made recommendations for statewide legislative solutions and municipal funding. Today, Representative Hogan is here to present the findings of this interagency PFAS task force and discuss the current and future action the legislature will have to take to address contamination in the Commonwealth in its many forms. Representative Hogan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Can you hear me at this distance? Thank you, especially in the back. I'm delighted to be here. I'll move through quickly. I know you have a very long schedule. I need to leave. I just couldn't not come and present these findings, knowing the work that all of you are going to be taking up in the next few months. And I know that House Speaker Ron Mariano has worked closely with MWRA on many issues too, and thinks the world. And so I wanted to get here and do a bit around findings and final recommendations. Adelina Holt, she's going to raise her hand, will be here through the presentations. So if you do have any questions around the hearings or the findings, please ask her. If we can't answer, we'll find the answer, and perhaps we'll be able to give you anything that you need. But as we begin, I just wanted to say the challenges of both COVID-19 and also the climate crisis, and now PFAS and the water issues that we're dealing with, it makes it more urgent than ever to address issues of emerging public health and environmental concerns. And we know that, we've seen it, and it is a wide palette. And I've just become very aware of the importance of public health as a fulcrum in which to see some of the issues that we're dealing with. We know that polyfluoroalkyl substances, also called PFAS, are widely used in industrial applications and consumer products, and exposure to these man-made or forever chemicals, because they are in our body, put our health at risk. They're there, they don't go away. Here in Massachusetts, PFAS has been detected in our public water systems, our private wells, our wastewater, and our soil. The Commonwealth has met the threats of PFAS contamination hands-on, and has responded quickly with funding, testing, discovery, and remediation. And that would be a shout out also to Marty Suberg from DEP for the work that they have done, which has really been a yeoman's task, and also wide-ranging and having to work in real time with both the concerns and the chemicals. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Marty for the incredible work that he has done. There are currently no enforceable federal standards for PFAS in drinking water, which has left states to establish their own, as we all know. Massachusetts established a maximum contaminant level of 20 parts per trillion for 6 PFAS chemicals and in drinking water. And we are just one of 16 states with cleanup standards for PFAS. So in some ways, we're able to take care of our own state, but other states are not quite as far along as we are in dealing with contamination. But the PFAS interagency task force really came to me from having PFAS contamination in my towns. It was quick. It was got your attention. Everybody knew what was going on. Town halls were called, and the DEP sort of rode in and helped establish what now are the protocols by which you deal with contamination in wells, whether they be community wells or private wells, in dealing with cleanup. And we saw as well how much we needed to look at this as an issue. And so I'll share the details of the efforts to combat PFAS along with the recommendations for next steps. So I will go through this very quickly. You know, PFAS are chemicals. They were first invented in the 1930s, widely used for their water, oil, and heat-resistant properties, which is why they are so hard to break down. Common products, nonstick cookware, you know all of that, I'm sure. And exposure to PFAS is associated with adverse health effects in both humans and wildlife, as we see in our rivers and we see in our communities. Where has PFAS been detected in Massachusetts? We know that both Mass DEP and DPH have detected PFAS contaminations across the state. We know our firefighters have been deeply impacted, and we'll see that in the report itself. But aqueous film forming foam, or AFFF from henceforth, used at military installations, but also fire training sites and very much at fire stations. And I'm sure many of you are familiar in your own city and towns with sort of what has happened as a result. Also, facilities that produce PFAS or use it are considered sources for contamination. And the greatest number of facilities that may be handling PFAS, electronics, waste management, metal coating. We have a metal coating facility in my particular district, plastics, resins, printing, and chemical manufacturing. And some of this is complicated by the fact that it's a piece of an ingredient that they don't even know is in there, but that's for another day. So you can see public water systems that detected PFAS of over 20 parts per trillion. This was the work of the DEP over the course of the last few years. They've done a really great job in identifying PFAS in communities, setting up discovery, and then remediation plans. So in terms of PFAS, you can see there's a cycle and how it goes into the soil and how it affects everything around it. But the CDC estimates that 98% of all US residents have PFAS in their system. So most of us sitting here today have PFAS in our systems. And there's no proven method to remove it. So we only accumulate, we don't rid ourselves of it. Our solution, or the solution of the task force, the idea coming from the task force after looking at so many different aspects of the issue, is to stop it at the source. we will be dealing with the consequences of PFAS for many, many, many years, maybe decades, but we certainly need to look and aggressively look at how we stop at the source through legislation, regulation, and litigation. And as you can see, as well as testing and treatment, funding, education, all important ways that we can approach developing solutions and implementing them. So around regulation, Mass DEP established a contaminant level of 20 parts for 6 PFAS in drinking water, groundwater, and soil. I know that that could probably change, and the numbers will only go down. In your drinking water, you want 0. When you're using the tap, you want 0. Now, the good news is that it can be dealt with within systems. You need filters, and they can be expensive. If it's for, large communities, it can be very expensive, but it can be dealt with. And so that, I think that's some of the good news coming out of PFAS is when we're talking about turning on the tap, that we do have ways to remediate so that you're not drinking PFAS in your home or work. The Toxic Use Reduction Act Administrative Council added PFAS to the TORA list of chemicals important in moving forward. Mass DEP is administering programs to test, treat, remediate drinking water for PFAS all over the state, and really a remarkable program. Hopefully with more funding that we're able to get in the last budget, we will see more people out testing and remediating. 41 towns have been awarded 10 million to respond, and the Clean Water Trust is offering 0% interest loans to public waste systems, water systems for PFAS remediation projects. And I know that many of you are probably here and having either used or going to be using these resources because they're really critically important right now. In terms of funding right now, about 30 million appropriated for PFAS testing and remediation over time, 100 million available in loans, and significant funding in FY23 for Mass DEP, which increased funding in general areas that also focus on PFAS. And we think that's going to have a lot to do with us being able to reach out to more communities more quickly. And we were also able to pass in the last budget $250,000 for the AFFF Take Back program in fire stations across the state, because they have old PFAS and that legend is much more concentrated in its toxic effect. And so what we were trying to do is get them out of the fire stations and remediate it. The DEP also provides information, and a lot of information on what's going on with PFAS, especially in your own community, which is probably why you're going on to the website to begin with. And it's also developed educational materials. So for docked primary care providers responding to PFAS concerns, because we know in particular those people, there are certain people that are more susceptible to the effects of PFAS with immune system issues and pregnant women, many things that would make one even more concerned. In April of 2022, so this year, I was proud to stand with then Attorney General Healy, now Governor-elect Healy, to file a lawsuit against 15 companies. You see them listed there, very familiar names. Also, through legislation, we did establish the PFAS Interagency Task Force. And we were able to really look at, and this will come up, but we were really able to look at what needed to get done, what the issues were, and how things might be solved. And it was a bit of a puzzle. But legislators have also filed dozens of bills over the session in responding to the issue. And in federal action, I know people will be here to speak, so I just briefly say the EPA issued a proposal to designate PFOA as hazardous substances under the Superfund. AG Healy led a coalition of 18 attorneys urging the US Senate to require DOD to clean up PFAS, billions of dollars in funding set aside in ARPA and bipartisan infrastructure law for states to address PFAS in drinking water. And again, we hope that increases the numbers of 16 states to many more as dollars go out. So the task force itself was set up through legislation and through the budget, 2021 budget. I chaired with Senator Sear, and it included officials from all state agencies, legislators, experts, and really folks out in the field that were either dealing with PFAS or looking to better understand what was going on. We had many scientists come in with specialties, and we also had quite a few firefighters and people in the field coming in to talk about what needed to be done. These were the issues that were taken up: detection and remediation, of course, exposure pathways, health and environmental impacts, environmental justice, sources of contamination, possible state and federal action, cost challenges, and then the potential solutions over about 9 hearings. We were, and the report itself was voted unanimously to approve the report, which we were very proud of because we had many state agencies involved with us that we try to work very closely with, so we all understood where and how we could move forward. And so there ended up being 30 recommendations and 8 strategies. So I will not give you the 30 recommendations, but I will give you the 8 strategies that we had to deal with. And these are, they will take them as they come, but you can see them in their totality. Fund PFAS detection and remediation. We know that it's already being done, but conduct investigations in site known or suspected seemed very important to use as a solution. And providing technical assistance to homeowners, municipalities, and public water systems. Private wells, my towns have actual private wells. It's a big, huge issue because not only dealing with it, but how homeowners figure out how to remediate the situation. And appropriate additional funding for the Clean Water Trust for PFAS projects, which we've seen starting to happen. And we also would like to see a PFAS remediation fund. And that's in discussions right now as we look at putting together our bill. Support environmental justice communities. And you can see from the graphic here and the map that there are many, and that they have been affected and will be affected to a greater degree than other communities. So we always want to take that into consideration as we move forward, which is why we put it so high on the top of our recommendations. Phase out PFAS in consumer products, going back to starting at the top and working down. We need to phase out PFAS, reduce the exposure and contamination by regulating the sale of consumer products that contain intentionally added PFAS by phasing out the sale of the products by 2030. This also ties us in with other states doing the same work so that we're all working together towards the same goals. Identifying priority products for earlier phase out, food packaging. I think that's obvious, textiles, and also, again, obvious children's products. So we'll be looking at those and ways that we can maybe address them sooner than the 2030 deadline. Allow state agencies to grant temporary exemptions for products that do not have safer alternatives. Again, trying to move forward in a way that makes sense for everyone, but certainly everyone knowing that the phase out looms in 2030. And implement disclosure labeling requirements. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes companies don't even know that they have PFAS in product. Printing industry being one, where some of the ingredients are not particularly familiar with the fact that they have it in their products. And fund research to identify and develop safer alternatives, because obviously, especially using firefighters is a great example, we do need to better understand how we can use other products and move away from PFAS in all of its forms. We are only dealing in 6 here to deal with. There are thousands out there. And so we do need to think differently about this, and we certainly need to regulate. So expanding PFAS regulation, support efforts by Mass DEP, and they'll be looking, they are constantly in study with water standards, and particularly over the next 2 years, we support the work that they're doing, and we'll be watching closely and working with them closely and what they'll be doing. And encourage Mass DEP to establish limits to PFAS and effluent for industrial wastewater in surface water discharge permits and groundwater discharge permits, as well as defining PFAS as a class for the purposes of consumer product regulation. As you can imagine, PFAS 6 are easy to name PFAS 7, and you're thereby not regulated or even tested for. And that just simply doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense now. It won't make any sense in trying to regulate PFAS 6 if we don't understand that PFAS is a class and need to be regulated as such. So encourage private well PFAS testing and remediation. And again, I go back to my little town of Stowe, where we are really dealing quite effectively, but also it permeates our town, and we couldn't give you a good reason if I had to stand here today. I couldn't give you a good reason, but we are seeing so much contamination in the town. But we are and have established a loan program for homeowners with private wells, and that's something that we believe would be very important to establish as part of this bill. Identify strategies to lower the cost of PFAS testing and remediation for homeowners, especially if it is a difficult remediation process. Encourage municipalities to institute a PFAS testing requirement during transfers of property with private well or with any new well permits. We feel like that is a way in which slowly and over time, we'll be able to ensure that everyone with a private well will be dealing with the fact that they may have PFAS in their systems, and to remediate. It's usually a filter remediation. Again, the good news is you put a filter remediation in your basement, and you will be drinking clean water. But it is a responsibility that you need to watch over, as you would any other piece of equipment like that in your home. Support firefighters and local fire departments. That has been and was quite an eye-opener when we saw the AFFF foam and the effects it can have in communities when no one knew that it was when it was dangerous, especially when there was training going on or other things, just being able to keep it as close as it was next to human beings and next to firefighters. So we would prohibit the use of AFFF for training and maintenance. That would begin immediately. The AFFF Take Back program we have already started and will monitor. We'll also review standards for turnout gear and ban the sale of turnout gear with PFAS once alternatives are identified. And that is really happening already. And that too, you have to think that industry knows that they need to find alternatives, that there's simply going to be regulation, there's going to be prohibitions, and industry will be looking to find ways that they will be able to provide what was once used, what was once PFAS was used for. Review standards for turnout gear and fund cancer awareness trainings for firefighters and update the Massachusetts Cancer Registry. Been huge increases in cancer in firefighters. Is it PFAS? We don't know. But I know that firefighters are very concerned about it. It's in their gear. It's in their turnout gear. They basically strap it onto their bodies when they go out to fight fires. And when you put all of that together, you need data. Again, going back to public health, you need data in order to understand what's going on out there with our firefighters, and they deserve it. Address contamination accountability, a path for adopting reasonable limitations for liability claims against homeowners and municipality. Just a way to move forward so that we can identify without, we felt this was an important way to look at how we might be able to identify PFAS in all our communities. Evaluate potential claims against PFAS manufacturers to seek remediation costs and other damages, and direct Mass DEP to work with the U.S. Department of Defense to conduct PFAS testing and initiate PFAS removal actions, especially on all their sites, on the military sites. We know, especially on the Cape, and my fellow co-chair, Julian Sear, has those issues very much in his backyard, and we have been dealing with those in our sets of recommendations. And of course, in health, enhance public health awareness, because you're building on existing efforts by Mass DEP and DPH to conduct public education awareness campaigns. We think this is really important, especially when we're dealing with private well owners and in general, making people aware of PFAS in the environment and how they might come into contact with it. And then it is very important to understand and provide guidance. So our next steps, since the conclusion of the PFAS task force, the state's allocated about 21 million to address PFAS contamination. Again, Attorney General and now Governor-elect Healy filed the lawsuit against 15 companies. We'll continue to look for funding opportunities through the state budget, ARPA, and bipartisan infrastructure law. All of those this is all in real time. As I speak to you, we're all dealing with this in real time, which is different from other issues sometimes. And we plan to file an omnibus bill. Julie and Sarah and I both plan to file an omnibus bill in the 193rd session to advance many of the task force recommendations. I was also glad to be here today because I would love to hear from folks as we move forward in their thoughts and in responding to the bill and what, can and would be done. I feel like we set up our parameters with the recommendations that we made based on what we heard, gathering information and working in a method with data gathering and talking to experts. And we know what we learned. And I know, again, because we're in real time, so many different things around PFAS are starting to take shape. And we're dealing really with water. And we know that soil contamination, we know that it's out there. But we think it's very important to put this bill together and be able to execute the recommendations of the bill, and hopefully we'll be successful in the 193rd. So thank you all for this. I hope it wasn't too sleepy inducing, but it is really a critically important issue, and I am so glad to be here today. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Representative. Next up is State of the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority. An overview of MWRA's declining water use over time and the current availability of water for new communities looking to join. Fred Lasky is the Executive Director of MWRA. Before joining the MWRA in June 2001, sorry, Mr. Lasky served as Commissioner of Massachusetts Department of Revenue from 1991 to 2001, managing the Commonwealth's Tax Administration. Let's get to it. Okay, you know who he is. Okay. Fred Lasky.
You mostly do that.
Okay, and before I start my presentation, I'd just like to thank, this is an amazing collection of people. I thank the Representative Hogan, the chair for all that hard work. And I look around the room today and it's a who's who of PFAS. So my hat's off to the advisory board and for all their hard work to get the elected officials here, the state officials, Marty Suberg, the Secretary Card, Vandana Rao. I mean, I could just go on, Dave, Ben Rigucci, from the Water Resources Commission. It's a lot of, and plus many of our member communities. And how you keep stalling here?
Yeah, keep it going just a little bit. Sorry.
No, but it's an important issue. And here at MWRA, there's two sides of it. Obviously, we're here to talk about water today, but there's also the wastewater side of it and the pellets, and that's a conversation for another day. I can do it without the slide.
No, it's okay. We got it. Just give me 2 seconds.
We have Mayor Headland is here as well. We good to go?
One second.
So Rep. Janino is here as well. Thank you, Representative, for coming. Senator Tar, obviously, has been a substantial player up in the north, up the Ipswich way. He's here today, and he's over the years really pushed hard to get some relief for what is one of the most stressed river basins in the country. Okay, so there we go. MWA, we got the wholesalers of water and wastewater services for 3.1 million people in 61 communities. 50 of them are water communities. Actually, it's 53 water communities. Many are both. We will deliver 200 million gallons of the best drinking water in the country on an average basis. And we will collect and treat the wastewater, 1.2 billion during a storm, 350 million during an average day. Why should you consider the MWRA? Why is the MWRA an option or even in these discussions? One, we have an abundance of high quality raw water out at the Quabbin and the Wachusett. We have a state-of-the-art water treatment program that provides us the ability to deliver, really, as I say, the best drinking water in the country. We as an organization provide incredible technical assistance to our member communities and financial aid as well. $1 billion in interest-free loans and grants to date. We are one of the major funders of upgrades to the local water and sewer systems here in Eastern Massachusetts. We also work very hard with the regulators and concept, we be honest with the experts and the various regulatory things that go on out there, and we provide that service to our member community. As I said, abundant resources, the Quabbin on the left, on the top, the Wachusett's on the right. I asked a hypothetical question of staff: if it stopped raining right now, how long before we would run out of water? And the answer is between 5 and 6 years. So we have an incredible storage capacity in those reservoirs, and the water quality in the reservoirs is incredibly is very strong as well. And we'll talk about that as we get a little further into the presentation. Why are we in a position to be able to say we can afford to provide water to new customers or additional water to partial customers? That's because the conservation effort that took place in the authority starting back in the 1980s has been incredibly successful. You're looking here, our safe yield is about 310 million gallons a day. And right now, on average, we're about 190 to 200. So we've got over 100 million gallons of excess capacity. An interesting factoid is that the city of Boston, through its great conservation efforts, leak detection, all the various things that go on, gray water detention, they use the same amount of water that they did in 1900. An incredible success story. And again, that gives us the confidence to say to you communities that might want to consider looking at us, we have ample supply of water, and we can do that without any further stress on the basins at the Wachusett or at the Quabbin. Our system is an engineering marvel. It's just incredible, the engineers who conceived it and built it. Again, massive reservoirs high in the hills of Central Mass. A lot of it's protected. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can see down in here, basically the water crashes downhill from Quabbin, 520 feet above sea level. And at every spot where it drops down, we have hydro turbines that make electricity on the energy that's coming from the water going downhill. And it's really an incredible engineering. And in the post 9/11 era, when we had various assessments done by the National Sandia Labs, for instance, one of the things they marveled at is we can deliver 85% of our water through gravity without pumping. So it's a great advantage for us in the overall scheme of life. Despite the fact that we at the reservoirs meet the quality standards, we have a state-of-the-art treatment process, ozonization and UV for primary disinfection. We have corrosion control, chlorination for secondary disinfection, and fluoridation, following the federal rules on fluoridation. But again, ozonization and UV are both highly effective in putting in tandem out at our treatment plant in Marlboro. Really does a nice job for us. And it allows us to, by the way, disinfect the water without any of the byproducts that come with heavy use of chlorine. It's not a good formula to have excess chlorine, particularly for pregnant women. Once it leaves the reservoirs, it never sees the light of day until it comes out of your tap. And the reason is that we built 6 new storage tanks on the way in both ends of the service areas, 7 actually. And these are them right here as we go. This is the one off of Route 90 and on the Mass Pike. And again, to the east and to the west, we have covered storage. And it really allows us to maintain incredible water quality standards. We also have spent a lot of time and effort replacing MWA owned pipelines to make sure, I mean, you can have great water, but if your pipelines are tuberculated, you're not going to get the water quality. We continue to have an ongoing aggressive program in 51 miles of community owned pipelines. It's funny because Father Leahy was asking earlier, what are we doing down by the skating rink over by the reservoir? Very curious as to what those big pipes were. And that's part of the day-to-day, making sure that we have a great system, a strong system, and a system that allows us to deliver clean water. System redundancy is huge for us. We've broken the program into different sections, and at every section we've invested heavily to make sure that we have redundancy so that if something happens, we can attack the issue. Examples of projects that to build redundancy was the Metro West Supply Tunnel, which provides water redundancy from 495 into Route 128. And that's a very substantial investment with rehabilitation of the Holtman Aqueduct. So that provides us with redundancy from 495 into 128. The new Wachusett Reservoir pump station allows us to have redundancy from Clinton all the way in to 495. So as you can see, we're building redundancy throughout. This is the Wachusett Aqueduct pump station, and this is the overflow that looks like the pipe sticking up. And this is when it's not pumping, energy neutral. That's not a trick question, by the way. I love it. And then the last and the final piece of the redundancy is the new tunnel that we're looking to build that will provide us with complete redundancy. This is a project that was first envisioned in the master plan of 1938 and is now well along in the planning efforts. I went back too far. We're in the MEPA stage. We put the preliminary design in, and we're now moving forward to the next level, the environmental review. And this, frankly, is going to be a 2-decade-long project. But when it's done, we will finally have complete redundancy in our transmission system. Drinking water quality, that's what we're all here to talk about today. The DEP standards, we show no more than a trace amount of PFAS. And you can see the compound is 0. And so we are, particularly on the wastewater side, there's real serious issues about our ability to use the pellets, but that's a conversation for another day. But we work very closely with Commissioner Suberg and his staff, Andana, in the Secretary's office on this issue. The other piece to this, several years ago, there was a study done on pharmaceuticals in the wastewater, and there were no traces were found for 22 different pharmaceuticals that were in the wastewater of other water utilities. We have built a state-of-the-art monitoring system that has at various locations in our system monitors 24/7 if there's a change in the water parameters, and we will know about it very quickly. These are the issues that we 24 hours a day, 7 days a week are monitoring for. And some of them, they're pretty simple, but, testing UV 254, chlorine burn rate. I mean, it's fairly simple. If you have X parts per million of chlorine here, you should have X minus parts down the line. And if that is burning faster than it should, you've got some organics in the thing. So, but it's really, not only it's for the public health, but also for the security. If someone were to try to compromise the system by adding something to the system. The other thing that we've been very successful at, and one of the best investments we make, is the protecting the watershed of the 3 watersheds that we have. And we work very closely with DCR and with the folks at DEP to make sure that we're continuing to purchase land to maintain the water quality. So you can see right here, here's the percentage owned. At the Quabbin, 80% of the land in the watershed is owned by us, by DCR. So here's the before the authority, this is in 1985, that's land and fee. Over the years, this is what we've purchased. So it's very, very substantial investment, and it really is the best investment you can make. And we continue even to this next board, the last board meeting, we purchased a big piece. We buy the fees and the actual ownership. And this doesn't include some of the other DCR watershed and other people who have protected land. That we do the CCR, like many of our member communities, a lot of our communities are here. It's a great resource for us to get to our member communities in their ratepayers, what's going on in the system and the quality of the system. And I did say we had the best drinking water in the country. John Sullivan's gonna, in 2014, because it was technically Boston Water and Sewer that won the first rate. And but we basically had the drinking water, and we were frequently the best drinking water in New England. And that didn't happen by accident. That great engineers from previous generations who had the vision and the commitment of the folks, many of them are here in the room, who work at the MWRA and work in the local systems as well, to provide this great service. And we sit here today to just let you know that we're open for business. If it's a fit for your community, we'd love to sit down and talk with you. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Thank you, Fred. Next up is my glasses off so I can see. Next up is the Northern Community Water Challenges. It's the Ipswich River Basin Communities Water Challenges and Possible Solutions. Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr he's the Senate Minority Leader representing the 1st Essex and Middlesex District. He has been a member of the Massachusetts General Court since 1991, when he won election to the House of Representatives, representing Gloucester, Rockport, and Manchester. In 1994, he was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate. In 1999, he was named Assistant Minority Whip of the Senate, and in 2001, he was appointed to serve as the Minority Whip until 2006, where he was elected to become Assistant Senate Minority Leader. The Senate Republican Caucus elected him Minority Leader in 2011, a position he continues to hold. Among many other accomplishments, he is also an integral part of the North Shore Water Resiliency Task Force, and we look forward to hearing his perspectives on today's discussion. Also, Becky, I think this is joint. Also, Becky Weidman. Becky has been with the MWRA for 5 years and is currently the Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs at MWRA. Ms. Weidman's group is responsible for working with communities and other entities seeking admission to the MWRA. Ms. Weidman has over 20 years of experience in environmental policy and regulation and has worked on public, nonprofit, and private sectors. Prior to joining MWRA, Ms. Weidman worked with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection with their drinking water, water quality and quantity, and climate change programs. Becky, come on. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm sure Becky and I will be able to share the podium at some point, and we'll work that out as we go. But I am so excited to be here with all of you today because, as so many people have said at this microphone, we are primed for action in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that reaches levels that we've never had in terms of collaboration and proaction with regard to issues relating to water supply and water resilience. I don't know about you, but on my way here this morning, as my GPS led me on sort of a tortured path around so many construction projects, I noticed a lot of water main going into the streets. So I think that's very positive in terms of infrastructure investment. But Joe, I want to thank you for your years of service to the MWRA Advisory Board and for your leadership and your passionate advocacy for the MWRA. It's deeply appreciated. And Matt, to you as well for your work for the MWRA Advisory Board and for bringing us together here today. And obviously, a word of thanks needs to go to Executive Director Lasky for his work to keep the MWRA not only sustainable over the years, but also to make it an innovative water supplier in terms of even a national perspective. I want to add my thanks to Secretary Card and the Baker-Polito administration for their leadership in bringing us to the point where we can have the kind of conversation that we're having this morning. And also want to add my thanks to Commissioner Suberg and also the folks at DCR for their work and their leadership with regard to protection of watersheds. So this morning, I wanted to share with you a little bit of the excitement that we have in the Ipswich River watershed around the conversations that we're having and the direction that we're hoping to go in. And it's important to understand that the challenges that we face come largely from a dependence on the Ipswich River. Named in 2021 by American Rivers as the 8th most endangered river in the United States of America. And the issue with regard to that endangerment is that there are so many communities that rely heavily on the Ipswich for their drinking water. In fact, it's estimated that 350,000 people depend in one way or another on the Ipswich River to be able to have the drinking water that they need. And as a result, you have communities that impact the river and the watershed in a couple of different ways. Number one, they pump directly from the Ipswich River into reservoirs, whether it be Peabody or the Beverly Salem Water Supply Board or others, and other communities that are smaller water suppliers that have wells that impact the aquifer that nourishes the Ipswich River. And so in one way or another, these communities are all interdependent and they're all dependent on the Ipswich River and the Ipswich River watershed. And so we have begun to turn what I consider to be a bit of a corner on the North Shore with regard to the Ipswich River by understanding first and foremost that all of the communities in the Ipswich River watershed are interdependent on each other. And none of those communities can face the challenges that we look forward and see without working together and having a singular conversation about how we can move forward together. Obviously, we have a couple of larger water suppliers in the region. We have Lynn, we have the Beverly Salem Water Supply Board, we have Danvers and Middleton that work together to be able to supply water. But we also have a lot of smaller public water suppliers like Topsfield or Ipswich. And those communities need our help to be able to find regional solutions for things that they simply can't address on their own, not only because of cost, but also because of logistics. And so we made a conscious decision back in 2016, 2017, as we saw prolonged droughts of the nature that we've seen even more frequently recently. And in fact, if you look at the drought monitoring report released last Thursday, you see that on the North Shore, we still have a drought situation in a number of communities, and others are experiencing still an abnormally dry situation. And so we made a decision, and it wasn't just my decision. It was a group of legislators. Then Representative Brad Hill was heavily involved in these discussions. Also then Representative Ted Speliotis. And we, at the same time, came to a realization and made a conscious decision. And that decision was, we can't wait in between droughts to take action. We've got to be proactive in the time between droughts so that we can address problems that require capital planning and logistical planning and funding. And we need to use that time valuably. And so we created the North Shore Water Resiliency Task Force. And for those of you that have been following this, you know that its name has changed a couple of different times. I apologize for the confusion, but we've been evolving. And we've been evolving together, not only among public water suppliers, but also with our environmental organizations. And I want to give a particular shout out to Wayne Castingway from the Ipswich River Watershed Association, who's been a driving force in the formation of this organization. But also incredible credit is owed and should be given to the municipalities and the public water suppliers, because for years they've been operating obviously independently to be able to meet the needs of their constituency. But in order to have a common conversation, took leadership. And it took the ability to come together and sit at a table and say that we are all going to recognize that what happens at the headwaters of the Ipswich River in Wilmington affects what happens downstream in Ipswich and everywhere in between. And so we've got to find that proactive approach and have the kind of conversations that we're having now. And that's exactly what's happening. So we've been working to build a task force that is the infrastructure for us to try to find consensus, if it is to be found, and to be able to make decisions together about how we are going to work to solve the water situation that we face in a regional, collaborative, respective, efficient way. And the task force has two guiding principles. One is to ensure the sustainability and the reliability of our public water supply. And the other one is to protect our natural resources in the Ipswich River watershed. And an important principle of the organization is that both of those things are equally important goals. And both of those things are not mutually exclusive. And so when we work together, we've started to look at options that we might consider. And I am so pleased to report to you that on September 28th of this year, just a short while ago, the communities and the environmental organizations signed a charter statement that I think is precedent setting, not only for the North Shore, but for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I hope you'll indulge me for a moment because I'm going to read the communities that are signatories to that organization or to our organization. So the town of Andover, the city of Beverly, the town of Boxford, the town of Burlington, the town of Danvers, the town of Hamilton, the town of Ipswich, the Ipswich River Watershed Association, the city of Lynn and the Lynn Water and Sewer Commission, the town of Lynnfield, the Lynnfield Center Water District, the town of Middleton, the town of North Andover, the town of North Reading, the city of Peabody, the town of Reading, the city of Salem, the Salem and Beverly Water Board, the town of Topsfield, the town of Wenham, and the town of Wilmington. Communities that have their own challenges, but understand that by working together, we can find the best solutions for those challenges. And so our agreement is the product of all of those communities being called together by conveners, and the conveners are the legislative delegation from the region. And I'm going to ask you to indulge me while I read to you another list, because I think it's important to understand the degree of collaboration that is happening around this issue. So the legislative conveners of the task force include myself as the chair, but Senator Brendan Creighton, Senator Diana DeZoglio, Senator Barry Feingold, Senator Cindy Friedman, Senator Jason Lewis, Senator Joan Lovely, Representative Jamie Zalway Belcito, Representative Dan Cahill, Representative Peter Capano, Representative Ann Margaret Ferrante, Representative Ken Gordon, Representative Rich Haggerty, Representative Brad Jones, Representative Sally Kerins, Representative Christina Minacucci, Representative Lenny Mira, Representative Frank Moran, Representative Trom Wynn, Representative Jerry Paracella, Representative Dave Robertson, Representative Paul Tucker, Representative Tom Walsh, and Representative Donald Wong. Now, if nothing else, that list tells you when we go into budget deliberations, we have a lot of votes. But more importantly than that, we have a legislative delegation that is committed to finding proactive solutions to the challenges that we face with regard to public water supply and protection of our aquifer and our watershed. And it's an important concept of this group that the legislators that I just described, we are the conveners, but decisions and consensus has to come from the member organizations. This is not a top-down organization. This is an organization that creates the environment for the municipal water suppliers and the environmental organizations to be able to find consensus if it is possible, and if it is, to take collective action in the most efficient way. Now, I should point out that in addition to those groups that I mentioned and the public water suppliers, there are other participants in this effort, one of which is our federal legislative delegation. Congressman Seth Moulton, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Ed Markey, supporting us every step of the way, as well as other organizations. I mentioned the DEP and the DCR. And the organization, the discussion is facilitated by two representatives of MAPC, Leah Robbins and Martin Pillsbury, and Sarah Cohen from DCR, who helped to organize the conversation. And so as we begin moving forward, we're looking at a couple of different propositions. Fortunately, the legislature earmarked $100,000 for our first study, and the RFP for that study is on the street right now. And it's intended to look at what are our options for potentially bringing additional water into the region. And one of the things that the RFP charges the recipient with is looking at the very study that has just been released by the MWRA, looking at expansion potentially onto the North Shore. It's also charged with looking at the potential creation of a new surface water storage body in the town of Topsfield on land that's owned by the Beverly Salem Water Supply Board for that purpose. And maybe perhaps looking at some other options that we might develop to be able to introduce into the region. It's important to understand that the first $100,000 study also builds on a SWIMMY grant funded study that's already been conducted by the Ipswich River Water Association and the town of Hamilton. And there's an important concept there, because that study began and concluded by looking at potential interconnections between communities. Because if you've read the report, and I hope you have, and if you haven't, I hope you will, from the MWRA to look at what it would take to bring more MWRA water into the region, because there are communities that already are connected either fully or partially on an emergency basis, like Wilmington and Peabody and Lynn and Reading. So there are some MWRA interconnections already into the region. But one of the challenges that we have is a number of these small water suppliers that would take a lot to be able to build out full MWRA infrastructure into every one of them. And in fact, according to the report, that could take as long as 25 years. That's a very long time. So one of the things that we need to consider is whether or not we can use interconnections and wheeling from one community to another to be able to bring additional water into the watershed. And that's a very real possibility. And that's something that we've already begun to look at, and we hope to look at even further. So as that study goes out the door, the next study on its heels will be another $175,000 study to take what we learn about interconnection and about supply from various sources and try to move that agenda along a little bit further. And ultimately, we hope to find a solution that everyone can agree to, that recognizes the environmental sensitivity that we have and provides a long-term solution. Because I would argue, and all of you know this just as well as I do, that providing reliable, clean water is one of the biggest challenges for every municipal water supplier in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's how we have to find, and why we have to find, innovative solutions. Now, the last thing I would mention is, in addition to the interconnections, there are a number of challenges in trying to bring the region together with additional supply. One is water chemistry. We know that if we introduce water from a different source into the water supplies of current public water suppliers, we have to adjust for that chemistry. Another is level of treatment. We've begun to treat PFAS in a number of the public water supplies in the region, but we know that if we're going to have more common sharing of water, that we're going to have to deal with things like uniform solutions for PFAS and potentially other contaminants. So again, everybody has high quality water into the region. There are a lot of challenges here. There are challenges we understand. There are challenges that may seem daunting, but we know that together we can work together to address them. And we are going to continue to push forward, because never again on the North Shore should we have the situation where we're waiting for the next drought. We aren't going to wait. We're going to be proactive. We're going to have respectful, productive conversations. We're going to find consensus. We're going to build consensus. And we're going to find ways to move forward so that in our region, with everybody working together and everybody in the conversation, we can have sustainable, healthy water and a solid, healthy Ipswich River for future generations to come. And as part of that, I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with all of you this morning. I do want to thank our hosts here at BC for this wonderful facility and everyone that's pulled us together to make this conversation happen. And I would say I'm particularly pleased that we've already begun talking with our colleagues in southeastern Massachusetts about building a similar task force to the North Shore Water Resilience Task Force, which I think, again, is precedent setting and paves the way for collaborative discussions, collaborative approaches to be able to address the issues that we must face. We will continue to face droughts. There's no doubt about that. The decision on how to address them and how to control our destiny is ours. Ours at a time when we're seeing record investment in the Water Pollution Abatement Trust, record funds available from the federal government, and the most important time, perhaps in our lifetimes, to be able to be proactive and get the job done. Thank you all very much. It's great to be with you this morning.
Let's make it.
I'm short. Gotta move the mic. Thank you, Senator Tar. I couldn't have introduced the topic any better. And you covered many of the issues that we dealt with in this particular study. So MWRA was commissioned with completing 2 feasibility studies to look at whether or not MWRA could provide water to the Ipswich River Basin communities and also to the South Shore communities. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our Ipswich River feasibility study. So there were 12 communities included in this particular study, which represented about 42.1 million gallons per day of water. Senator Tar introduced all of the communities. Well, not all of the communities in the task force are included in this study. This study included Beverly, Danvers, Hamilton, Ipswich, Lynn, the Linfield Center Water District, Middleton, Peabody, Salem, Topsfield, Wenham, and Wilmington. And as Senator Tar mentioned, as you can see, the light blue shaded communities that are outlined in purple are actually already partially served communities by MWRA or have an emergency connection to MWRA. And what's great, again, the task force has been in place for, I want to say, over a decade, perhaps around a decade. So there have been several studies commissioned in the area looking at opportunities for water supply. So Senator Tar already mentioned there's an RFP on the street to look at all the existing studies and bring them together. There was a study he also mentioned completed over the summer with Hamilton, looking at interconnections kind of in the northern communities in the Ipswich River Basin. And there was a planning, a water management planning grant study completed in 2017. So this is just one, the work that MWRA did is just one of several studies that I think can be looked at in conjunction, which it sounds like the RFP that's out is going to do, to look at options for supplying water water to the region. And I should take a step back. I want to thank Mike Walsh and Andy Miller and their team at CDM Smith for their work on these studies, and also Katie Ronan at MWRA. Many of the communities in Ipswich River, we had conversations with you. You would have talked to Katie and Andy, and we appreciate your input as we were working through these studies. So, and I just wanted to note, in addition to those partially served communities, we're also talking to Linfield Center Water District about a partial connection to MWRA system. So for this study, there are, an unlimited number of options that we could have considered in terms of connection options for connecting MWRA to these communities. In order to put boundaries on the study, and this applies to the South Shore area community study as well, we wanted to look at fully serving all the communities with basically a hard pipe connection. So the wheeling issue that Senator Tarr introduced, where you would have to look a lot at water quality issues, were not scenarios that we considered for this study. So we looked at one option, which was to fully serve all the communities, and then based on our existing infrastructure, where we could kind of partially serve communities without having to build like a long, new, extensive pipeline all the way up into the Ipswich. So this is our first option. This was fully serving all the Ipswich River communities. So this is the project that would take 20 to 25 years. Basically, we're looking at building a pipeline from starting in Malden, connecting to our tunnel system, our city tunnel, all the way up into Ipswich. So it is a lengthy pipeline, which is why that duration of the project is so long. Infrastructure is expensive, certainly in the last couple of years with the pandemic and inflation and cost of products. We have seen a significant increase in pricing across the board on all infrastructure projects, and a very conceptual planning level design cost for fully supplying all these communities with a new pipeline from MWRA's tunnel into Ipswich is about $1 billion to $1.2 billion when you look at inflation. In order to look at a shorter duration project that could happen more immediately and connecting to MWRA's existing distribution system, so not having to make that tunnel connection, we looked at options to supply Linfield Center Water District, Peabody, Salem, and Wilmington. So those would fully serve those communities. It would not address the communities further north. That would take about 5 to 7 years to put into place. And then we have connecting our existing distribution system. So again, shorter pipelines, a shorter duration to make these connections, but still a longer length of pipeline, basically connecting our existing distribution system all the way up to the Ipswich, about 10 to 15 years. And the second two options for not supplying all of the communities are both shorter duration and less expensive than that fully served. So this study basically provides options that can be further pursued. I think, again, in connection with the RFP that's out from the North Shore Resilience Task Force, I think there'll be some good opportunities, some good options that the Ipswich River Basin communities can consider. In addition, MWRA is one of those options that could be available to those communities. And these studies are available on MWRA's website. You can find them through our homepage. If you have any trouble finding them, you can certainly reach out to me and I can send you a link.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, I can take any questions.
Excuse me, folks, hold on. You have to be using a mic or else the people at home
Yeah,
cannot hear
sorry.
you. So hold on 1 second.
I'm on the Conservation Commission in Weymouth, but we're dealing with some of these issues as we'll talk about in a minute. One of our problems is sewage. Deer Island is going to be adversely impacted. They're already starting with the rising seas and other things. How much of this is going to also require major work on your sewage system? Certainly in Weymouth, we're going to have to do something significantly on ours, not just dealing with water, but all the stuff that goes into the sewer pipes, and many of them are actually full or in bad shape.
So this study really only looked at connecting to our water system. In the South Shore, we did look at capacity in our wastewater system, but we don't anticipate supplying any additional water in the Ipswich River Basin communities would have any impact on our capacity at Deer Island because it should not add any additional wastewater to the system.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, well, thank you. Oh, thank you, Becky. Okay, next up, we're going to shift gears to the southern communities. We're going to talk about the challenges facing communities south of the MWRA system and possible solutions. Weymouth Mayor Robert Hedlund. Mayor Hedlund served his first term as a state senator in 1990. After narrow defeat in 1992, he served as the Metropolitan District Commission's Deputy Commissioner, overseeing maintenance and operations for state parks, rinks, and beach facilities. He won back at the state Senate in 1994. He held the seat most recently serving as Assistant Minority Leader until his resignation to become Mayor of Weymouth in 2016. Over the course of his state Senate career, he served on numerous legislative committees, including the Joint Committees on Rules, Housing, Municipalities, and Regional Government, Transportation and Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture, as well as Senate Committees on Rules, Post Audit and Oversight, and Global Warming and Climate Change. Mayor?
Good morning. I think it's still morning. It's kind of, today's kind of taking me full circle. Having joined the Senate in 1991, walking into the Republican caucus room, Fred Lasky was the legislative director. I think that's his title that he held at the time, for then Minority Leader David Locke. And I met Bruce Tarr my first year in office speaking at the Kennedy Library. And later Bruce joined the Republican caucus in the Senate and eventually became the minority leader. And I was his first assistant and sat next to him. And when I saw the agenda today and it stated that I was following Bruce, I was a little nervous because we always considered him a modern day Daniel Webster based on his oratory skills. So he's a tough act to follow. Since we got a lot of technical stuff out of the way, I want to offer you three anecdotes about two which are true, one that's not true, about water and sewer issues, and two of them involve the two gentlemen I just mentioned. When I first took office, I had never held municipal office. I had not held any state position. I was in the private sector owning a truck repair business. So I parachuted straight into the Senate, which is not the typical background of folks entering the legislature these days. And one of the first calls I got was from a woman complaining about raw sewage percolating up in her backyard. And after the discussion I had with her, I said, well, you know, why are you calling me? Have you tried your local Board of Health or your local Board of Selectmen? And she said, no, I didn't want to start that high up. So it was a humbling experience going into the Senate. That's the part that's not true. That was a joke that a veteran member of the Senate told me to use. But the true story about the two gentlemen that preceded me, they're probably two of the most dedicated public servants that I know. When Title V was implemented back in the 90s, we had a lot of problems on the South Shore with failing systems and folks trying to contend with the Title V regulations. And Bruce often visited my district to actually inspect septic systems. I'm not kidding. As we developed a legislative response to some of the issues that we were facing with Title V implementation. And around that time, Bruce mentioned one time that he had bought a camper, mobile home. And I said, oh, I didn't know you like camping. Where are you going camping? He says, oh, no, I'm using this to go up to Quebec to inspect alternative septic systems. That's the kind of dedication Bruce takes to the job. And Fred Lasky, one anecdote about Fred. So he became MWRA executive director, and we had a project that came through Weymouth to address some of the sewer capacity issues, the Mill Cove Intercept project. And MWRA was boring a tunnel through North Weymouth. And there were a lot of constituent complaints, and I was getting a regular call from a woman complaining about the impact of the boring activity in North Weymouth, and she claimed it was causing some damage to her home. So finally, after numerous conversations, I drove over there to meet her one day to, actually in Frank's neighborhood, to view the alleged damage. And I was sitting on her couch talking to her, and all of a sudden a vibration started up and the lamp almost fell off the table. I had to reach and hold the lamp from falling off the table. And what had happened was the boring machine was stuck, and the MWRA was having to extract the machine and was doing some serious excavation in that neighborhood. And I said, you know, Fred Lasky's a good guy. Let me call him direct. I called him from the house. Things quieted down, and I called him from the house, and I was explaining to Fred the situation. All of a sudden, the boring activity started up again. And Fred said, I'm having a tough time hearing you. What's that noise? And I explained, he was literally down there the next morning at 8 a.m. personally meeting with the neighbors and getting everything straightened out. So Fred takes the job seriously and does a great job. So a little bit of background, I guess, on why I'm here, representing South Shore District for a number of years, 21 years to be exact. Kind of the snapshot is Weymouth is on MWRA sewer, but Weymouth has its own water supply. And the other communities that are to the south of Weymouth, the 8 communities total that I represented at the time, the other 7 have their own water systems. It's a mishmash of systems. Hingham just nationalized theirs. It was a private water company that they just took over. But water supply issues were always a problem for all of those communities. We're fortunate in Weymouth that with Great Pond as our primary source, we don't face the shortage issues that some of the other communities south of us face, like Situate and Hingham, Norwell, communities like that. You've seen continually them having to take conservation measures due to drought. We've been fortunate in Weymouth in recent years. This year was September was the first time we had to take some action in a while to address drought conditions. It's interesting to note that in Weymouth, our water usage is actually below what it was 20 years ago when we had a lot of problems with our system. We were under a DEP consent order to implement conservation measures. Those conservation measures, along with a new treatment plant that the town built about 20 years ago, has helped alleviate a lot of that water loss. We still have about a 20% roughly water loss in Weymouth that we continually try to upgrade our systems to address that. But our interest, and actually, let me just recognize real quick before I get too deep into this, because of the interest in this issue, I guess, not only Frank Singleton that you heard of, who is my great appointee to the Conservation Commission, he's sitting adjacent to a constituent of mine, and she doesn't mind the publicity if I name her, Alice Arena. Actually, and our District 1 Councilor, Pascal Berger's here, where that boring activity took place. But they're some of the first people I saw this morning when I got here, and they will probably be the last people I see before I go to bed tonight, because Alice has joined with 9 other residents to put together a citizen's petition to put in place a development ban. And the main thrust of their argument is water issues. So we have a hearing tonight before the Weymouth Town Council on that measure. So I expect it's going to be a long night, and they'll be the last people I see tonight. Our interest really in MWRA started quite some time ago, even preceding my tenure as mayor 7 years ago, with the redevelopment of the South Weymouth Naval Air Station. Make a long story short with that, there's enabling legislation that has been in place in various forms through the years to guide the redevelopment of the airbase. And those plans have changed over time. And it's a significant redevelopment project when you consider that it's 1,400 acres with the current permitting that's in place, pretty much shovel ready, but there's no water. In 2014, when I was still in the legislature, there was new enabling legislation put in place guiding the development. I came in 2016, there was an existing water agreement that the town had with the developers of the former airbase, which is known as Southfield. So there were a number of developments that occurred prior to, and then some coming online into my term. that was permitted and the water use was from the previous agreement. We did an updated agreement with the developers of the airbase. But over time and early in my tenure, there were some problems, well documented, I won't get into, but long story short, the master developers pretty much went bankrupt. There was some malfeasance amongst the leadership of that organization, internal lawsuits, and things have been pretty much frozen since then. In that legislation, it requires the master developer to bring a water source to the site. So there were MWRA analysis and discussions happening preceding, obviously, my tenure as mayor. Things were moving quite slowly, but with the appointment of a new master developer, Brookfield Partners, excuse me. Things were kickstarted and the main thrust of that was, and I'll quote the current master developers, the thing that keeps me up the most at night is water. So they had been working to look at a water source as part of the analysis. We had sort of partnered with them. The arrangement we had was they were to use their own consultant to come up with a water source for the 1,400 acres at Southfield, the airbase. Our consultants, environmental partners, were to sort of act as a peer review. Over time, environmental partners actually took up the efforts for Southfield. We found that to be a more efficient process. So things obviously through those studies that the consultants were doing really were leading them to an MWRA solution. Other things were looked at like desalinization and other possible solutions. But the solution that clearly made the most sense was to bring MWRA water to the former airbase. As time went on, we were looking at long-term issues with our water supply and felt that maybe there's a possibility to put the entire town on water. And as to quote, I forgot who spoke earlier, I'm sorry. She used the term, thank you, the term that the stars are in alignment. And we felt the stars were lining up for us to look at for a long-term solution for not only the airbase, but the town to consider putting the entire town on MWRA. And with the arrival of ARPA money and with the discussion that the advisory board had with the waiving of the entrance fees and other such issues like PFAS and looking long-term what our capacity abilities were, we started down that road. And at that same time, under the heading of stars in alignment, the state earmark, which we appreciate Representative Speaker of the House Mariano getting, was the study money. We started to move in that direction. Now that study has just been released, and obviously we're still disseminating that, but some of the technical aspects I know have been discussed, and I think some will be discussed once I finish up here, if I make it through with my voice. And Alice is probably very excited to hear that I'm losing my voice and might not have it for tonight, but. So the quick timeline that, again, that led us here, we began in earnest the discussions with the MWRA about a year ago, and they were kind enough to sit with us on numerous occasions and come down to Weymouth. Environmental Partners was then a new contract renewed with SRA in conjunction with the town to prepare a water and sewer capacity analysis with the primary goal of assisting us to transition to MWRA, but really the focus was to what are the best means to assist the town in maintaining a high level of water supply and quality. Look at a global picture, if you will, to our residents through 2040. And what they came back and what they concluded was that the MWRA regional water supply is the only viable choice for long-term supply of the projected water demands in Weymouth, with the ultimate ability to provide redundancy and replace the town's current supplies. I will mention that since Frank is here from the Conservation Commission, the other kind of element of this that led to that stars being in alignment. We did a number of projects to enhance a herring run that we have in Weymouth. It's one of the more significant runs in eastern Massachusetts and in the Northeast. We're very proud of that, and we spent a lot of town money to protect that resource. We did a number of upgrades, fixed a flood control gate, for instance, that had been responsible for a significant amount of fish kills since the 1970s. It's been flawed. I know that we looked at that for years and years when I was in the legislature, and when we finally took care of that issue about 2 years ago, you know, we had folks from the state down celebrating with us from marine fisheries and other environmental groups. And one thing that was brought to my attention at one of the ceremonies was the state had just created a department level. I still call it Environmental Affairs, EOEA, but they've changed the moniker a couple of times and the acronym a couple of times. But within EOEA, new department level entity, Division of Ecological Resources. And I wasn't even aware it had been created. And they were telling us that, you know, there's potential grant money to look at restoration projects. And one of the members of our Conservation Commission, who's a kind of a fisheries expert, had been pushing the concept of moving us to an MWRA supply so that we could restore Great Pond as an ecological resource and eventually get herring to return to this pond, which would significantly enhance the amount of herring that spawn in Weymouth. So that was another element to this, was really the environmental benefit of potentially returning our two water sources, both Great Pond and its backup Whitman's Pond, to more of an ecological resource and recreational resource. That was just sort of an added bonus. Anyway, environmental partners in the MWRA did develop several scenarios for the MWRA to supply the town, including cost estimates. And obviously cost estimates are a big part of this. We worry less about the capital costs, especially with the fee being waived and with the ARPA money available. We think that the capital costs are manageable. The big concern we have and the big political drawback, and I do have to worry about the political aspects of this on occasion, would be rates. It's interesting that, no offense to Fred, but the MWRA, in the years preceding my entry to the Senate 30 years ago, MWRA was really demonized because we were an MWRA sewer community. And many of you might recall that many MWRA communities, or MDC communities, when the MWRA was created, had to contend with significant sewer rate increases. And Weymouth was really a hotbed of protest for that, to the extreme where I recall the citizens group that protested MWRA sewer rates hanging an effigy of Paul Levy on a light pole on the floor of a bridge. Fortunately, Fred Lasky does not have that image in Weymouth that Paul Levy had at that time, which was obviously somewhat unfair, but there is still a mood that, you know, the MWRA has a sour connotation in Weymouth. And one of the things that some of the folks, even within the citizens group, are making claims about what potential rate increases could be. And that's something we're still kind of fleshing out. And that is the one element to this that is considered a negative. There certainly are a lot of benefits to MWRA water, which you've heard a lot about, supply and quality, et cetera. So one of the things that surprised me in the report, again, I have not delved into it very thoroughly, but one of the things that jumped out at me was that it identified that the town possibly or likely could keep our current water source, Great Pond, and use MWRA as a supplement. That's an option as opposed to complete MWRA service to Weymouth. So that's something that has to be yet to be determined. And I think that's going to be a big key to this. And I think it's going to be one that influences residents whether or not this is something that we should be doing. So right now we're looking at the application process. Some of the claims that the citizen group, makes that states why we can't go to MWRA, I think are false and are things that will be addressed in the application process. So we're going to hear more about that. Things like the water loss that I mentioned. There's a thought that, you know, they won't allow a community in that has more than a 10% loss of water in their infrastructure. So that's one example of some of the claims being made, and I think that get fleshed out in the application process, and we're looking forward to resolving those issues. Obviously, the entrance fee waiver is significant. You know, we heard numbers like 40 million, but it looks like it would save the town about 25 million in that process. And we greatly thank the advisory board and the board of directors for that incentive. And we're still looking at CDM Smith's report on expansion to the South Shore. Again, I want to thank Speaker Mariano for his focus on that. He, in a meeting, he said that I guess I'm perceived by some as a conservative Republican. But he said, you know, you would be perceived as the most progressive leader on the South Shore if you get this done. And I know that might shock Alice to hear that, but I think maybe in my presentation, I should put that pull quote out there in our PowerPoint tonight from Speaker Mariano. So I know he's very supportive of this. And, you know, he comes from an MWRA community. So in that report, something you all know, and that's, I guess, the reason why we're here. It notes the struggle that other communities on the South Shore are facing. And I guess one of the hurdles for those communities and possibly MWRA, if we are talking about a regional solution, is the infrastructure that leads to Weymouth. It looks like the capacity that the MWRA has based on current, excuse me, based on current MWRA infrastructure north of us is the capacity in the Blue Hills. And it looks like there's enough capacity there that could supply Weymouth, but it doesn't address additional capacity south of us. So that's going to be a topic for future discussion, I think, amongst MWRA and the state and communities to the south of us. They're going to possibly want to wheel water through Weymouth. So that's an interesting subplot to this. And it notes the needs of those communities in the study. And I know that it is a challenge. Not only did I represent those communities, but there are some, and I know Peter Foreman from the South Shore Chamber of Commerce is here. There are development projects in the pipeline that other towns south of us would like to take on. And we have had outreach from on numerous occasions from both developers and town officials to the south of us that come over and see me and ask, do I have capacity to assist them, which we don't. And I know that it would unlock a number of projects that those other towns deem important, not only residential, but commercial. So long-term, I know that's something that those other towns have great interest in. So I think I outlined and gave you a little snapshot of the technical and the political considerations that are underway right now, and a snapshot of sort of where we are and why we're doing what we're doing in Weymouth. And I want to thank the MWRA for the staff support that they've given us. And if you'd like more information on this, you can reach out to my office, or you can come to Weymouth Town Hall and spend a few hours with me tonight and listen to two different opposing slide presentations if you'd like. Thank you.
Becky's going to give a snapshot of the southern communities. Becky?
So again, another great introduction to some of the issues on the South Shore. And I should probably articulate a little better. So those two options. So again, for the South Shore, we're also looking at kind of that hard piped option. So getting water to the communities directly with a pipeline connecting MWRA system to the community. We didn't look at wheeling. We looked at kind of the existing capacity of our system. So we kind of have tentacles coming down to the north, coming up to the North Shore and down to the South Shore. So we looked at options where we could utilize those existing connections and how much water we can transport towards it within our existing distribution system. And then we also looked at how we could actually fully supply these communities. So those are the more expensive options that are new pipelines that are coming off of our tunnel system. So for the South Shore, we looked at 10 communities with approximately 40.5 million gallon per day demand. Those communities were Abington, Avon, Brockton, Cohasset, Hanover, Hingham, Norwell, Rockland, Situate, and Weymouth. We also looked at the former Naval Air Force Station. So this study is completed, also available on our website, and as Mayor Headland mentioned, we have been talking to Weymouth and also the former Naval Air Force Station about a potential connection to MWRA system. There are no partial or fully served communities in this area, unlike in the Ipswich River Basin. And so for this particular study, we looked at two options, one to fully serve all of those communities and the other based again on our existing capacity in our distribution system, partial supply in the area. So looking at supplying Avon, Brockton, Weymouth, and the former Naval Air Station. We did not consider Wheeling again in these options. So we do include in both studies a discussion of water quality issues that would need to be considered should Wheeling be an option where you're blending multiple sources of water, but we did not specifically look at that in either of these studies. So the fully serving South Shore communities, so we do feel like we would have the ability to transport water through our tunnel system into a new connection to, well, one main line from our Dorchester tunnel that kind of spurs off to fully serve all of the communities included in this study. Again, it's a lengthy pipeline, so the duration to construct this pipeline we anticipate to be 20 to 25 years, and a cost ranging really between $1.25 billion and almost $1.5 billion, again, to fully supply all of those communities. The partial options, so again, we were looking at, well, this is the same map. I apologize, that's not the right map. But the partial option was looking at connecting basically to our existing distribution system, and it would partially supply Weymouth and the former Naval Air Force Station, and also Brockton and Avon, which would be coming off a different branch of our system. So those are options. Again, I apologize, this map is not the correct map. I'll just go back here. And so for this study, we did address the wastewater question. So the main focus of both studies was looking at our water supply and our ability to provide water to communities in the Ipswich River Basin and also the South Shore. For the South Shore, we did look at wastewater capacity. We did determine that we do not have any additional capacity to add wastewater to our system. So again, we would be looking at supplying water to these, the study looks at supplying water to these communities, but not accepting any additional wastewater from these communities. So that's an overview of that study. I can answer any questions if anyone has any.
Any questions? You need the mic. Matt, the microphone, Matt? Yeah, thanks.
Just to follow up on that, we've recently had to dig up Bridge Street for several months because the sewage system had collapsed due to ground corrosion and other things. But the whole system, the sewage system in Weymouth is surcharged now with existing development. So I'm not clear how you could add water, and especially with Union Point. With the large scale development that is already there and will be increased, plus what's going on with just our normal development, which is why they're proposing a moratorium. So how do you end up basically not dealing with the sewage system, or are you assuming the town is somehow going to do a mega project to increase capacity or do otherwise provide the ability to handle the sewage once you supply the water?
So this study was really just looking at kind of the basics, like a 1-for-1 supplement. So instead of using existing supplies in Weymouth, you would no longer be using those supplies from Weymouth. You would be now receiving your water from MWRA. So it did ensure, the study looked at, ensured that we could provide for future demands, but it was really just looking at a one-for-one replacement, not necessarily looking at development that would potentially add demand in the system.
Well, the Union Point is the real problem then, because that is sort of the elephant in the room. It's been very poorly developed, in my humble opinion. The law, the legal basis for it is, anyway, it's been a mess in the past. We now have a problem where once we open the gate down there to what they want to do, they've already had to turn down a hotel they proposed, thanks to the mayor's leadership on that. We would have a problem with the sewage system, regardless of then, unless somehow we say to the Union Point, sorry, we'll give you some water, but we won't let you, but the water means you're going to have sewage.
So it's my understanding in the process of that conceptualizing that development. So they did go through MEPA review, Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act review. MWRA did provide comment. So there was no basically no guarantee that MWRA would be providing wastewater services to that development. I think that's still to be determined, but that would have to go through an entire public process to determine how they would handle additional wastewater from additional development.
Yeah, because we don't have our sewer plant anymore. We have all our sewage right now is treated by MWRA through the transfers to them. So if we're going to end up with sewage down there, they're going to have to build a sewage treatment plant. And where is that going to discharge to, et cetera?
Right, and that would still have to be worked out.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, thank you, Peggy. Okay, next up is the Metro West System Feasibility Study. My dad told me when I was a young man, go west, young man, but don't drink the water. Challenges facing Metro West communities near the MWRA system and possible solutions. Town of Concord Director of Public Works, Alan Cathcart. Alan has been working with the Public Works arena since 1985, dedicating most of his time in the water and wastewater sector. In 2021, he was appointed the Director of Public Works for the Town of Concord. He holds a master's degree in geology from Boston University and is active member of the Massachusetts Water Works Association, Massachusetts Municipal Association, and the Massachusetts Coalition for Water Resources Stewardship. Over the years, he has provided municipal advocacy in numerous water and wastewater policy and regulatory forums, including the Massachusetts DEP's Safe Drinking Water Advisory Committee. Alan?
Good morning, everybody. Batting cleanup here. I just want to say one thing. If I cough or sneeze and then look like I'm about to drop to the ground, please, don't everyone come up and give me Heimlich. I broke a couple ribs recently, and so it's very painful, but I will recover. But just give me a second. With that said, I'm very pleased to be here today. Obviously, the nexus of needs and interests, both north, south, as well as west, when it comes to water supply is pretty apparent by just the attendance today as far as who's here and why you're here. I think everybody in the room has an interest. I'm pretty excited about the opportunities that if we can work collaboratively and collectively, what we could achieve. It's a very big deal, what we're talking about. And as far as, it's a little bit ironic, when I reached out just as a question to Becky a couple months ago, as far as this, the challenge for Concord was PFAS and where are we going, what are we going to do with our individual sources. Becky, you've done an amazing job sort of rallying this group so Concord's interest can be addressed. Thank you very much for that. This is remarkable. When I first started in the industry over 37 years ago, I remember the general manager for Littleton Light and Water, that's where I was an intern, called up DEP to, I think it was Jim Fuller at the time, invite him out to a ribbon cutting of our new water supply well. Jim Fuller kind of looked at his docket and said, I have no record of the town of Littleton having a new water supply well. We've come a long way. Everything we do is highly regulated. We're talking about public health and safety when it's in the water supply sector. And what we've come to realize is that our industry has evolved, and every step, nothing has really happened to make our business, I'm here as a practitioner, any easier. And it's not a complaint, it's just the challenges that we continue to face, whether it's the water quality, emerging trends and contaminants, environmental impacts, or just dealing with local politics of kind of the needs of the community for economic growth and development, as far as, maintenance of public property. We all, as practitioners, are in the same boat. And so when Concord was going through, and what drove the question for the Metro West was initially, we're looking at investing in a water treatment facility, the tune of about $40 million for one source of supply for 1 million gallons a day on average. It's a lot of money. When I go to town meeting to make a request for the borrowing authorization for this source of supply, people in Concord are pretty sophisticated. Next question is, okay, what is that going to do to our rates? Step one. Step two, what are the other needs that we have? In addition to the aging infrastructure, we've done a great job explaining to the community, we've been underinvesting in our infrastructure for years. This is just the pipes in the ground. What about our other sources of supply? Well, up until last year, I could confidently tell them, we've been monitoring this, we've been planning this. We have a 10-year pro forma to lay out how we're going to incorporate this $40 million investment into our long-term strategy. Now I have to look at the fact that PFAS has really been a game changer. And so we're looking at 4 or 5 other sources of supply that may need treatment in the very near future. Some of the lessons that we've learned recently are not particularly encouraging. When I've talked to my brethren over in Wayland, they have been dealing with sort of a bottled water dispensary situation based on a 24-hour notice of PFAS elevated above a standard. We're looking at real challenges that we are collectively facing, regrettably independently. And so the first couple calls I made when I started looking at Concord's challenges was to neighboring communities to say, what's on your radar? What are you folks thinking about as far as your long-term needs? What are you going to be explaining to your customer base? And the conversation very quickly became one of, very similar, challenges, shared ideas and interests as far as, what they may be doing independently. But more importantly, the first conversation of, should we really be looking at, a regional solution? When you're dealing with the sophistication and complexity of treatment individually, we have to look over the next 5 years to 10 years, where we hear there's lots of money that's coming down towards, fortunately, into the water and wastewater sector. But even when you look at the numbers, we see the $30 million for PFAS. Well, I just told you one treatment facility in the town of Concord is going to be $40 million for 1 million gallons. The $100 million in the Clean Water Trust. When you look at the needs statewide, it's daunting. So what we really have to do is reassess, sort of our old model, our old way of thinking. This is New England. We're great about our independence and our ability to solve our own problems. The fact that we aren't regional, you look across the country, most large systems are regional. There's reasons. It's basically efficiencies of resources and staffing and money. I have a standing weekly meeting with a couple colleagues where we've talked about some of the challenges we're up against. And there's been this ongoing joke that I said, when I retire, I'm going to get Big Al's point of use water treatment company involved, because everybody's going to need this based on the evolving regulatory challenges for meeting Safe Drinking Water Act. Ironically, I had a good friend just 2 weeks ago living in the town of Harvard give me a call to say, Al, he's the only guy who calls me Al, I got this quote, it's about $12,000 for a treatment system for my home. You want to take a look at it? And I just, sort of the headache goes, what were the tests this, recommendation is based on? I'm sure there's no discussion of PFAS. The recommendations consider arsenic, selenium, these sorts of things. And I've always told homeowners, point of use treatment is small, but it doesn't mean it's any less complex. The challenges that each of our independent water systems are facing may be relatively small, but they're increasingly complex when you talk about the numbers of facilities that we're responsible for, the staffing challenges that we have when it comes to the sophistication and oversight of each of these treatment processes, the technology that gives us great information real time on any upset in any one of these sources is also at risk, where we have more information, more computerization. We're looking at cybersecurity challenges. All these things are what we individually deal with when we're managing a water system. So when I reached out to Becky to talk about the concept, because I know going into town meeting, MWRA is always the alternative. Have you evaluated the alternative? Up until last year, I could say back in the envelope, it was an easy assessment. It didn't take a lot of work. Today, it's a very different situation. And when you talk about the Metro West needs, it's not a large area. I think the communities that have been sort of identified as potential interest, and again, this is very early in the stages of our building a coalition. We're somewhere around the 25 million gallons a day on average, maybe 30, 40 on average, based on the communities. We have to look at this and understand that we're dealing with water districts, enterprise systems. Every water system is a little bit different, managed a little bit different, has different governance associated with it. I mean, this is our classic dilemma when it comes to Massachusetts politics, but this really is an opportunity. And I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to understand is, and it comes down to a very simple cost benefit. And when you look at what the costs are, our industry has been woefully inadequate as far as identifying the real cost of service. In fact, everybody talks about how cheap water is, when if they don't talk about how cheap it is, it's how cheap they expect it to be. And so we're trying to find this balance as far as, well, what are the real costs to provide the Commonwealth the water it wants and deserves, and look at it not just what is the year-to-year town annual budget look like, but we're talking about once in a generational opportunity to align needs for drinking water in a region. We have a very good regional authority that is volunteering. It has some capacity to give. We're in a situation where communities are looking at drinking water challenges that are immediate, economic growth and development challenges that are very real. When we talk about the needs for residential development throughout the Commonwealth and how to sort of accommodate that. And so this really is the right time for the Metro West to at least engage. At this point, it's early in the discussion. You know, I say we're kind of Massachusetts, but most operators, I think, are from Missouri. They all want, you know, show me, show me. It's like, we can't show you, but we have to start doing our due diligence to understand really what are the costs of service, what do our customers expect, and how do we build quality, resilient systems that aren't for, you know, in 5 years, but 10, 20, 50 years from now. That's the kind of thinking we need to be looking at collectively. MWRA as a regional system does that. Fred was talking about plans that were conceived back in the 30s that are starting to be realized today. That's almost 100 years later. I will say, sort of in the final, you know, comment here, what's really important, a lot of money is going to be spent over the next 5 years. And it's my interest that if Concord's going to spend money, it's not stranded investment, it's towards a long-term, long-range strategy. And I think everybody has to look at that and understand where are we going to spend the money? Because once we spend it, you know, it's our communities are flipping the bill. With that said, there are federal funds available. EPA is here, and I'm not sure if we're going to hear a little bit about some of those opportunities. But if we can't get this group to collectively figure out how to position Massachusetts ahead of the curve to get some of that funding because we've done a lot of the work up front. The North Shore, the South Shore has already started. The Metro West is listening and eager to participate. If we can't do that now, then, I'm not quite sure. The alternative, a lot of money will be spent locally involving technical design, consulting, construction, and funding mechanisms. That is not going to go away. The question is, can we do it smarter and collectively? And that's really our challenge today. When I came up, I was talking to some other suppliers from the Metro West. We don't have a formal coalition yet, but we have a lot of intelligent people who are starting to talk and think. We don't have a political approach at this point. It's more suppliers talking, but I think we can probably use the benefit and understanding in this audience, as well as beginning to bring our reps up to speed to understand what are the joint interests and how do we benefit and collaborate. So the watershed groups is going to happen, is going to be with their involvement, participation. We have to understand the wastewater issues as well. We have to understand the stormwater issues as well. All these things matter, and this is a very, very important first step in potentially solving those big challenges. So, thank you.
And Becky's going to do a little presentation of the Metro West communities.
Thank you, Alan. That was once again a great setup. You laid out the issues better than I could. So just an overview, kind of a brief overview of what's happening in the Metro West area. So this study is still ongoing, unlike the other two studies which are completed. So this is actually up to 19 communities. I swear we add a new community every week. We have new communities calling, both me and Alan asking to participate in this conversation. So right now it's about 19 communities. We have, it's almost 40 million gallons per day of demand that we're looking at. We do have some fully and partially served communities participating in this discussion. Those communities are really looking for additional water and or redundancy of their connection. So currently the communities participating in this discussion are Acton, Ayer, Bedford, Chelmsford, Concord, Groton, Holliston, Hopkinton, Hudson, Lincoln, Littleton, Maynard, Natick, Sherburne, Sudbury, Wayland, Wellesley, Westford, and Weston. So it is a big group. We anticipate that we'll have a final study in the spring of 2023. And of these communities, we're currently working with Hopkinton, who is pursuing a full connection to MWRA system. Wayland, I saw Tom here, is looking to make an emergency connection. And we are having conversations with Maynard. So we are talking about with some of these communities about connecting to our system in more concrete terms. Just briefly overview kind of the next steps. So as I mentioned, the Ipswich River Basin and the South Shore study are complete. Those studies are available on MWRA's website. I encourage you to take a look at them. The Metro West study is ongoing. Again, we should have a report in the spring of 2022. And in terms of next steps, so MWRA is continuing to work with communities who are interested in making a connection to our system. Communities are in various levels of interest. We just had a conversation with Walpole, who was not on this list last week, to talk about connecting to MWRA's system. So we're available to talk to any community interested in further exploring a connection. And a big piece of this, which I think has come through in every conversation, is really the funding and looking for available funding and how we can kind of pool resources and look to funding these projects. So with that, I will turn it, unless there are any questions for me. Oh, I see a question. What happened?
Question and halfway back.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Bill Copperthorne, Assistant Town Engineer in Town of Arlington. Thank you for the presentations and going through all the different study areas. I won't pretend my memory is good enough to recall what the Ipswich River Basin's total predicted demand was going to be. But obviously, if the kind of tying these all together, if you had option number one for all of them, where everyone joins MWRA, we're going to be starting to approach that safe yield for the entire region. I guess my question is, what were the estimates of current demand that were used in these studies based off of? And as an MWR community in Arlington, I know usage is much different than in many of these communities that are not MWRA due to their water management permits and conservation efforts. And although MWRA communities have done a great job, I know we use a lot more water. So what were those assumptions, and what impacts might it have on current MWRA communities in regards to conservation?
So that's a great question that I definitely did not get into. So just to be clear, so these really are feasibility studies. So looking at the potential to supply water through our existing distribution and transmission system to communities. When we started the study, we were really just looking at the Ipswich River Basin and the South Shore area. And we did do our hydraulic modeling based on both of those studies being fully supplied. To your point, so even though our use as a total system has gone down over time, as you know, Mr. Lasky showed in his slides, we do not have capacity to fully supply all three of the study areas. We have probably, and it's a little bit comparing apples to oranges here, because those numbers I showed were max day demands, because we want to make sure we can provide on a max day. So on an average day, we probably have about 51 million gallons of water to provide, which is about 75 million gallons on a max day. So we could provide for a subset of these communities, but we could not provide all of the study areas. But we went into this process with the understanding that we wanted to see how we could supply communities so they had something to assess. And also generally with the understanding is we don't really anticipate all the communities would come in requesting a connection for being fully supplied by MWRA. So there are definitely limitations. We cannot supply all, I'm trying to add up the numbers in my head. I think it's like 40 communities. We could not fully supply all 40 communities, but we could supply a significant subset of those communities without having any impact to providing water to our existing communities, because that 51 million gallons that I mentioned still provides for some capacity in our system to allow for growth within our existing communities.
Okay, Bill?
Hi, my name is Bill Kelly, Boston Water and Solar. Would there be a possibility if these communities made the connection that they could maintain the potential that they could reconnect in the case of a severe drought in some of these river systems? And also I hear no mention, Mayor Headland pointed out that when if they did have a tie-in that would provide the current reservoir system some capacity maybe to revive the herring runs and tie-ins to the river systems that have been basically wiped out a lot of fish migration inland. Now, if they freed up many of these reservoirs, could they contribute to their previous and traditional function as serving to supply the river and lake systems that have been so compromised over 200 years of development in our urban system, basically?
So I think there were two questions there. So I think the first question was if communities could make an emergency connection basically to be supplied during drought. I do think that that's definitely an option. I think that's a better option for communities, kind of if you have a community, you know, farther away from MWRA system that wants to join and the pipeline comes through that community, making that emergency connection is probably financially feasible. And we're definitely having those conversations, particularly in the Metro West area, because the pipeline that we're looking at would go through communities none of the communities are really connected to MWRA systems. So communities would have an option to be fully connected, partially connected, or have an emergency connection. And in terms of what happens with that water that the communities aren't currently using, I mean, that would stay within the basin that water was currently being pulled from. So that would have potential positive ecological benefits in the local community.
Okay, one more question.
Oh.
Hi, thank you. My name is Paul Lauenstein from Sharon. I want to just comment that this 100 million gallons a day that we're talking about was created originally by aggressive water conservation in the MWA service area. Now that we're looking at a potential maximum of 120 million gallons, I saw from those three areas, and we don't have that much. What, if any, requirements would there be for both new communities and existing member communities to promote conservation, to build on how we got this 100 million gallons in the first place, and perhaps accommodate everyone through creating more supply through conservation? For example, requiring conservation oriented water rates or rebates on water conserving fixtures. Will there be any kind of requirements or encouragement of that kind of approach?
Well, I think some of those requirements are already in place, and certainly for new communities, they have to go through a review process to be admitted to MWRA, and some of those requirements may be placed on those communities during that process. I mean, again, I feel like we're in the very early stages of just looking at the feasibility of connecting these communities. So there's a lot of work to do down the line in terms of what happens next. And I think also, you know, one thing we really are interested in getting a handle on, which is a tough question to ask because there's a lot that goes into it, is what communities are really interested in joining our system and what exactly are we planning for. And that is going to be kind of a work in progress that I hope we'll have a better handle on over the next couple of years. But, you know, I think new programs and how we deal with new communities is something that we're going to have to start thinking about, but we haven't quite made it that far in the process.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, good morning, Rebecca. I'm Patrick Fastenello from Town of Walpole, one of the Sewer and Water Commissioners. It's obvious that you can't supply everybody with everything. Is there sort of a list of priorities, and is that list transparent, and is it weighted? I'm curious to know how you're going to decide who gets what. Thank you.
Well, I mean, to that question, again, so we're at the very early stages of planning, looking at the feasibility of connecting systems. I mean, I think in some ways, this is a unique situation that we have not previously been in. When a lot of the programs and our processes were put into place, we were trying to make sure our existing communities were using less water. And so we've been abundantly successful on that front, which is why we do have more additional water to provide. I don't think we've ever been in the place where we've had potentially, and again, it's a potential, more demand to join to our system than water we have to provide. So, you know, at this point, I think we're dealing with individual communities who have expressed interest, working through them with the admission process. Certainly those communities that come in, I mean, as we have water, we will be supplying interested communities with water. We don't have any sort of ranking system in place at this point because it's unclear if there's a need for that.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you, Louise Miller with the City of Framingham. And it was more of a comment than a question. I want to first make a pitch for MWRA and for joining MWRA for those communities that are not MWRA. When you join MWRA, it's more than just about clean water and wastewater. It really is about the depth of experience, of knowledge, and resources that can be brought to solving whatever water, sewer issues that a community has. And it can't be matched, no matter, what community you're in, what experts you have. You really, really cannot match this 100 years of experience and knowledge and dedication. So that's my first pitch. So I think here we're talking about a couple of different issues. Some of them are more immediate than others. With PFAS, we're looking at changing regulations, and some of these regulations have caused communities to be out of compliance with respect to providing clean water. Looking at cost benefit, and I know we're going to be looking at finances later. Going forward, there are only going to be more regulations. There are not going to be less regulations. So whoever is looking at, water systems and investments, you can do cost benefit analysis today, but you really have to think what is coming down the pike. And there are a whole bunch more regulations that we're looking at. And then, longer term, looking at climate, and everyone's got to be putting together climate action plans, and we have to be realistic about what that means for water resources. And again, I think, MWRA right now is looking at additional capacity that it has within its own system. But I'm sure that, as things move forward and climate is addressed as a real concern in the future, more solutions will need to be arrived at with respect to capacity. And I have a hard time believing that MWRA is not, again, going to be in the forefront of that discussion. And then the last thing is with the city of Framingham, there was a little bit of discussion regarding Metro West, and we're here to say, we're ready. We have representation here today to work on helping with a solution for whatever the Metro West issues are. Framingham is one of the larger communities in that area. We've had discussions with some of the communities that you had on your slide, and we'd like to continue being part of that discussion with you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you, Becky. Now the fun stuff, how we're going to pay for all this stuff. Funding options. This is an overview of some programs available to help fund community infrastructure projects. First up is Nate Keenan. He's the Deputy Director of the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust, where he has worked since 2011. During that time, he has worked to execute over $2 billion in bond issuances, drafted the trust's first green bond and sustainability bond disclosure language, and developed numerous new loan and grant programs for communities throughout the Commonwealth. Nate graduated with a bachelor's degree from St. Michael's College and a master's degree from Suffolk University. Nate. Thank you, Nate.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. No problem. Okay. Yeah. Great, excellent. Thank you. And thanks for having me here today. It's great to get in front of different groups to talk through what's going on, because we have a lot of money and I want to be sure that everyone knows what's happening at the trust and what's happening throughout the state in terms of financing for these projects going forward. And it's been great to hear about all the different projects that it's currently being looked at by MWRA and what's being reviewed and thought about, because it's really important to get it right. As other people have talked about, this is a kind of once in a generation opportunity that I didn't think I'd see. After the ERA funds, we kind of thought that was it. And then coming back now with this infrastructure funding is amazing. And it's a great opportunity for everybody in the state to get involved in, get funding for your projects, and hopefully to do it at the lowest cost possible for your ratepayers. So my goal today is just kind of walk through what we do at the Clean Water Trust, and that we manage the state revolving fund for the clean water and the drinking water program. So I'll give an overview of how we operate, give an overview of our application process, and then of course the new funding opportunities that are out there over the next 5 years for cities and towns. So the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust, we manage the state revolving fund. And so the goal of the trust is to provide subsidized financing to cities, towns, and other public water suppliers to improve, protect, improve water quality, protect the environment, and protect public health. So mostly this is done through subsidized loans. We offer 2%. Our standard loan term is a 2% loan for the standard projects that we do. So we are funded through EPA state matching grants, or EPA grants that are then matched with state funds at the local level. So we manage this process with Mass DEP. I am a Treasury employee at the Mass State Treasury, and we work with Mass DEP, and they handle the project review and evaluation process. So to date, we've done about $8.1 billion in loans. We actually just closed a bond deal last week, so that should have updated that number. So about another 300 million loans to about 300 communities and about 97% of the Commonwealth's population. So we have touched a lot of the state with our financing throughout the years. And then so when you look at what we're doing each year, so through the two programs, we put out a annual intended use plan. And so for 2022, we did just under $1 billion in loan commitments to clean water projects and about 363 million in drinking water projects. Our drinking water program is greatly increased over the past few years with just different management of funds and trying to get as much money out the door as possible. As we've seen, as somebody just mentioned, that new regulations create new needs, that PFAS has just become such a massive issue throughout the state. And that has really taken a lot of our funding. And so that's what we're seeing a lot of our projects go to on the drinking water side. And that's why the number has increased. But if you see, these are the projects that we do finance for the clean water side is what you'd expect: the wastewater treatment improvements, collection system improvements, CSOs, all the way down to non-point source. So somebody mentioned earlier, the alternative septic systems, we are looking to finance those as well. So it kind of runs the gamut on the clean water side. And then the drinking water side is much more straightforward, just really protect public health and be sure we're getting the cleanest water out there to our citizens, or our residents. So this is just a look at what we've been able to do over the past 34 years that we've been active. So we're looking at $6.9 billion in projects funded by the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This gives you an idea of the overall capacity of the program. And then on the drinking water side, it is a bit younger of a program, and it has different regulations. So not all the grant goes to projects. So it is a bit smaller on this side. Excuse me. And this is MWA water in here, and it is the best to fill it up every morning before I go. So thank you. All right. And then so just going into what we're now receiving from the new federal funding. So the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I know everyone calls it something different. So with EPA, the terminology that they've come up with, or the one that they use, is bill. So the new bill is bill. It's great. It's not confusing at all. So this was signed into law on November 15th, 2021. And really, this is historic in what we're looking at in investments for the state revolving funds and just generally EPA throughout the country. So $5 billion to EPA for drinking water, wastewater, single largest investment the federal government has ever made. And I don't know if everyone here was around for ARA. I came in the tail end of it, but that was massive. And this is even bigger. We're looking at sustained investment through this funding. And so most of it is going through the state revolving funds throughout the country. So Bill, in addition to creating more funding, is looking at different key priorities. And one is increased investment in disadvantaged communities. This is set out under the federal acts on the federal acts make us create a list for disadvantaged communities using different metrics. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on, but it's focusing a lot of the additional subsidy on disadvantaged communities, the loan forgiveness, things like that. Disadvantaged communities are roughly environmental justice, but there's a little different nuance to it. But that's sort of the idea of who this additional funding or additional loan forgiveness is targeting. We are really focused on lead service line replacements. We're currently running a program for 100% loan forgiveness for identification of lead service lines. We really want to get on top of those and identify those and then start to remove them as we find them. Of course, PFAS is massive. There are 2 new grants going towards PFAS, one on the clean water side, one on the drinking water side. And that's a big goal here. Also climate resiliency, prevailing wage. And then I think the biggest change that comes down through the bill for our program would be the Build America, Buy America. Of course, with more funding comes more requirements. And so this will be a pretty big change to the program for domestic sourcing of materials for manufacturing of domestically made materials for the state revolving fund projects. So we just received guidance from EPA in November, and we're currently working to implement that into our program. But there is a waiver for projects designed before a certain period. So we do have a grace period as we work this into our new program, but it will be a large change to how we operate, or the requirements on the program. All right, and so then this is what, in addition to the increase in funding, this is what's really going to make this funding go out the door. So we do have to give additional loan forgiveness from the new grants to the borrowers. So 49% of the supplemental grant has to go out as loan forgiveness to disadvantaged communities. 100% of the emerging contaminants grant must be given away, and at least 25 to disadvantaged communities. And that's on the clean water side. And then on the drinking water side, 49% of the supplemental grant must be given away to disadvantaged communities. And then 100% of the emerging contaminants grant for PFAS must be given away, and 25 to disadvantaged communities. Then lead service line, 49% of that must be given away to disadvantaged communities. So we're really looking to target this towards that those group of communities throughout the state that meet that requirement, and really target that investment in those communities to really help them out as they look to get this work done. And then so as we just talked through what the requirements are and what we're looking to do with it, this is what we're looking at for funding over the next few years. So we're looking at considerable increases to our yearly grants. So in total, about 1.1 or 1.2 billion in federal funding and state funding over the next 5 years. So this is a massive investment. So if you have a project that you're looking to do, this is the time to get in and get an application into the SRF. All right, so now I'm just going to walk through kind of the application process and how this works. And this is something that Mass DEP manages. They manage the project evaluation based on a set of criteria that really determine that the projects are going, or their funding is going to the most useful projects. So problem definition is paramount. So it looks at what is this project looking to fix? So the public health impacts, the exposures, frequency, and seriousness, and then the environmental impacts as well. So resources affected, frequency, and seriousness. And then there are project priority categories. So lead service line replacement is, of course, right up there as it is nationally as a goal to get those out. PFAS remediation, as I mentioned, that is the largest projects, or the most projects we're financing on the drinking water side. And then combined sewer overflow control, that's been around for a while and is still an issue here in Massachusetts. So those are some of our major goals in getting these projects done. So project selection criteria, Mass DEP looks at a number of different metrics. And so the planning for the project, the needs analyzed, the options evaluated, the recommended options selected, and then the project effectiveness. Does it protect public health, achieves compliance or reduction in violations, and restoration designated use? And it also, is it cost effective? So DEP, when they go through this, they also consider enforcement orders. Regional solutions are given priority. That would be great if we could see more of those come through. Energy efficiency and renewable projects, innovative approaches, program priorities, and environmental justice communities. Great. So Mass DEP, Division of Municipal Services, reviews applications. This is what they're looking at when they're going through the process. So local borrowing authorization, projects, plans and specifications, required permits, federal cross-cutter requirements, and compliance with public bidding laws. So they're doing a lot of the work to be sure that these projects are in compliance with EPA guidance and federal law. And then this lays out the state revolving fund loan process. I won't go through every step of the way, but this kind of just shows you that there is a large time frame between when the application comes in to when the project is completed or even begins construction. So I just want to get across that if you have a project that you're looking to do, it's better to start as soon as possible in terms of the application and getting through the process than waiting a little bit longer. And as you've seen, there is the funding out there. So getting ahead of the game is the best course of action. And so this slide here just shows much more basic, just like when your application is submitted to when funding begins. So this is over the next 5 year or the next 4 years, but the remainder of the bill funding year. So it gives you an idea of when the application must be submitted and then kind of the process for when you'll begin construction. So to give an idea, if you're looking to plan a project out a number of years, this is what you should really be looking at to get that done. Okay, so I'm just going to go through different programs that we run and why you would bother going through the trust in addition to this additional funding. So the advantages of borrowing through the trust, we offer a fixed low rate of 2% that is set by statute. Right now, rates, as you've probably seen, rates are going up. And so going through us provides a stable planning tool for communities to know that your rate will not go above this no matter what the market does. We are kind of that protection to be sure that you're not going to see any price increase on interest rates as you go through the process. We offer loans 20 years is 2%. Anything over that is a little bit higher interest rate, but it's been pretty low recently. And then certain projects qualify for reduced interest or 0% interest. We also offer interim financing, so construction loans. So when your project is being constructed, it's 0% interest and no fees. So it's basically free construction financing as you're going through the process. Then we also offer flexible repayment terms up to 30 years. So we can work with communities. If you have issues with debt service early on, we can work with you, kind of structure that the best way possible. So we're not putting too much burden on the communities in the early years. We can kind of work through that with you to see what works for both of us. And then also, as I mentioned before, the disadvantaged communities for additional subsidy. So part of our grant every year has to go to these projects. This is set out in federal statute. So we've come up with a program that really targets the loan forgiveness to the most at-need communities. So based on a adjusted per capita income that's published by DOR, it's all this information is publicly available, how we come up with a list and how it changes each year. So based on your adjusted per capita income, it determines the percent of loan forgiveness. So this is just for a traditional program. We fully expect that these numbers will increase as our amount of funding increases. So a lot is unknown still as we're going to how we're going to apply loan forgiveness to future projects. So as just shown there, we usually set a fixed amount for loan forgiveness for communities, but we are working to see how that's going to look. So there's a lot of factors right now, as most everyone knows, that project costs are increasing rapidly. There's supply chain issues. So when we're looking at project costs that are coming in and there's still a few years out from bidding, the amount of change that we're seeing right now from the initial application to the final dollar amount is drastic. So we're trying to work through that to provide the best information possible on what you can expect for loan forgiveness. So it's definitely increasing the amount available, but it's also creating strict rules on who qualifies for it. So it is only disadvantaged communities. Then we're also seeing increased demand for loans. So for the 2021 IUP, we had 817 million. Then for 2022, we had 1.3 billion. And then for 2023, we had 2.8 billion in applications. So we're trying to manage all these different factors into providing the best information possible on what's available for loan forgiveness and what communities can expect by going through us. So basically, the biggest takeaway is that we don't know the amount that we'll be able to provide, but there will be more than has been in the past. That is most certainly a definite. And then this map here just shows the disadvantaged communities in Massachusetts. They are spread throughout the state, and this list is updated annually based on new numbers provided by DOR. And then just briefly, I just want to go over some of the other additional subsidy programs we offer. So we offer an asset management planning grant. So we offer 60% of the grant or 150,000, whichever is less, to assist communities in completing or updating asset management plans. This program has really taken off. We're doing about $6 million a year on this program now, up from 2 million a few years ago. So it's been a great success. Not necessarily applicable to this group, but there is a Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust Fund that was set up. I know some people talk about regional solutions. The Cape has done a great job at looking at their wastewater issues and coming up with a regional solution that works for them. This fund is taxing the Airbnb and short-term rental tax that then goes into a fund dedicated to water and sewer. It's a really smart approach to really tackling the issue of affordability on the Cape and how to pay for it. So they're taxing the tourists that come that then create the wastewater issues, and they're paying for it with that. It's great. Then also the Housing Choice Loan Program. So communities that are designated housing choice by the administration receive a 50 basis point interest rate reduction on their loan. Also, we offer 0% nutrient enrichment reduction loans for any project that is helping to remediate nutrient enrichment of surface water bodies or water supplies in the area. And also our very, very popular 0% interest rate PFAS mitigation loans. Unfortunately, they're very popular, but that's a program we've been running for the past number of years now, and we've put a lot of money into that, and we expect to do the same in the future. And then our new 100% loan forgiveness lead service line planning program is up and running. We've had a number of these loans executed so far, and we hope to have more people come in to really get ahead of the federal regulations that are coming for identifying lead in your system and remediating it. And then finally, we will be offering a free technical assistance for small, rural, and tribal publicly owned water treatment works. This is in the works, and we hope to have this announced soon. So that's kind of an overview of the different programs we're offering and the funding that's out there. This is just a sheet that you can easily look at and see kind of what we're offering for our different programs. And then finally, I just want to mention this briefly. We offer a Lead in Schools program. So DEP now does the testing through an EPA grant. And then we have financing for grants to fix the issue by putting in a water bottle filling station in schools. It's a smaller program, but I just want to mention it whenever I'm in front of anyone that if your school has issues with lead, please reach out to Mass DEP or us, and we can help you get that fixed. And then here is our contact information. So please, I welcome any questions.
Any questions? Okay, no, I don't see it. Okay, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Okay, last up is the EPA's Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. Mary Fasano. Mary is an underwriter for the WIFIA program in the Office of Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, joining the team in 2020. Prior to that, Mary worked in the commercial banking industry, underwriting tax-exempt bond deals for nonprofit organizations. Mary has also worked in the community development finance industry, where she structured complex capital transactions to finance economic development projects utilizing tax-exempt financing and a variety of tax credits. Mary received her bachelor's degree from St. Michael's College and her graduate degree in community economic development from Southern New Hampshire University. Mary, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today, all the way from Washington, D.C. But I am a local. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. And my mother hails from Newton. So I think I'll qualify as a local for the purposes of this discussion today. I am so impressed with all of the ideas that have been discussed today. And Nate did a phenomenal job talking about the financing that is offered through the State Revolving Fund, which is an incredible resource for your organizations. I'm going to talk about the WIFIA program. It's a newer program. The State Revolving Funds, as Nate said, have been around for a long time. WIFIA is newer and it's a little bit different. There's not enough money out there to finance all of the needs that the industry has. So using as many programs as you can is a really good idea. So the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFIA as we call it, is relatively new. It just came about through legislation in 2014. So we are a national program that works with all of the states and US territories. We offer long-term, low-cost supplemental credit assistance. So these are some of our program features. Our interest rates follow the Treasury rates based upon the weighted average life of the loan. So as the Treasury rates go, so go the rates from WIFIA. So we know what's happening with interest rates right now. I just closed a loan last week to a water system, and the rate was 3.83%. A year and a half ago, we closed a loan for under 1%, you know, so we all know what's happening with interest rates, and we just have no control over that. The maximum portion of loans that we do. So we look at the total eligible project costs, and that can include your planning and design work, which can be very expensive. And we lend then 49% of the eligible project costs. So the other 51% needs to come from somewhere. Very often it's the state revolving funds, but it can also be revenue bonds or cash or grants. Or the only limitation is that no more than 80% of project financing can come from federal sources. So if you're using ARPA money, and you have to look at what the state revolving fund source of funds are, whether it's federal money or state money or another source, but no more than 80% can be federal. The maximum final maturity of the loan can be 35 years after substantial completion is achieved. So if you have a 5-year construction project and substantial completion is in 5 years, the maturity can be 35 years after that. So potentially you can have a 40-year loan. And this can really help with moderating the rate increases that are going to be required in order to repay the loan to WIFIA. We can defer interest during construction. We can defer interest for up to 5 years after substantial completion. And we can be very flexible with how the loan is structured so that how the loan repayment is structured so that if you have some other debt, say that's falling off in 10 years, we can even postpone the beginning of repayment of principal. And we do allow you to borrow on a subordinate lien. We do a lot of subordinate lien loans. And by statute, our loans are required to have an investment grade credit rating. We have no control over that. But the advantage of our program is that your interest rate is based upon the weighted average life of the loan, not based upon your credit rating. So getting a subordinate loan can be advantageous if it preserves some of your senior lien debt capacity. Our minimum project size is 20 million for large communities. I think in general, we're talking large communities here. The definition for us is population of 25,000 or more is considered a large community. So the minimum project size is 20 million. Our average loans are about like 200 million. We have no maximum. So our largest loan to date is close to 700 million, but we're looking at loans right now in excess of $1 billion. As I already said, the maximum eligible project cost that we'll fund is 49%. And since it includes planning and design, which is often done way before you go out for financing for the total project, we can also reimburse for those project costs. We have the same federal requirements that the state revolving fund has with federal cross cutters and NEPA reviews. We also have received a waiver for the Build America, Buy America. So as long as projects have initiated their planning and design work prior to May 14th, 2022, they're eligible for the waiver, which means you only have to comply with American Iron and Steel. For our loans, we also allow you to combine projects, so you could have a very broad project definition, maybe to improve resiliency or improve water quality. And we can include a variety of projects under a single loan. Let's see if there's additional. We also, this might be of interest, we're also we really try to be very borrower friendly. So after the loan closes, if you request a disbursement of the loan, we will turn that around in 15 days. So we really want to get you the money when you need it. You're only charged interest for the money that you borrow. We try to be very flexible with the loan documents. So if you have existing debt documents for your senior lien debt and you want senior lien debt from us on parity with your other bondholders, we try really hard to accept the existing terms that you're already using. I think I already talked about some of these. We have developed a master credit agreement. So for some of our borrowers have CIP projects that have multiple projects addressing a single issue, but the projects are going to be done at different timeframes. So maybe a portion of it is ready to be done in 2022, but maybe design is not completed and the next phase might start in 2025. We can do a master credit agreement and combine those loans into one credit agreement so that you have a commitment of funding ahead of time for the large project. And so it gives you a little bit of certainty. We also provide loans to state revolving funds. So Nate, if you want to, apply for our SWIFIA program, we'd be happy to help you. The loan process, it used to be a competitive process, but now it is a rolling process. So, but there's two prongs to it. The first step is a letter of interest where you submit that, we review it. And what we're looking for is the project eligible? Is it technically feasible? Are you creditworthy? Do we think you can pay us back? And our plan is to review that within 30 days. And then we invite you to submit a full application. At the time of the full application, you pay the application fee of $100,000, but that application fee is a down payment towards the actual closing costs. So it really gives us the ability to start the legal work and the other work that needs to be done to close the loan. It's not a quick process. I mean, it can take 5 to 7 to 8 months to close the loan. But the advantage is we also entertain letters of interest and applications for projects that are very early stage. So many of our projects that we close loans for might be at the 30% design stage or sometimes even less. If we do invite you to apply, we'd like the application within 1 year. But since we have a rolling process, we expect that you'll initiate the process when you're ready to move forward. All right. Oh yeah, we do get a lot of questions about what federal funding is, since there's an 80% cap on the federal funding in a project. So we do look at the infrastructure. Money is certainly federal, ARPA is federal, WIFIA is federal. The state revolving fund, they can tell you what the source of their funding is, so that you'd have to discuss that with them. I think that our eligible borrowers and eligible projects, when we designed the program, because we're a supplemental financing arm, we modeled the state revolving fund. So if it's eligible for what Nate is doing, it's eligible for what WIFIA would do. So we really don't have a conflict with the state revolving funds. So these are some additional eligible project activities. Any developmental phase, as I said, with planning and design, obviously construction, acquisition of property that's needed for the project, and capitalized interest for the non-WIFIA portion of the debt. We do the same environmental reviews that the state revolving fund does, and you do have to have NEPA review prior to closing a loan with WIFIA. And these are, you don't need to memorize this. I would recommend that you, if you're interested in the WIFIA program, number one, you can always email us and we'll respond really quickly to your questions. So if you want to talk in more detail, so we do calls all the time to do presentations with borrowers and really help answer their specific questions about projects. Let's see. I'm going to skip that. I'll just end here. If you want to visit our website, here is our address. But again, you could just Google WIFIA and you can see the projects we have funded, who has borrowed money from us, what states they're in, what types of projects. Everything that was discussed today would obviously be eligible and would be, we would be very interested in working with MWRA and any of your communities on helping with providing financing for these critical projects. And I know Alan talked about regionalization. We are seeing a trend in more complexity of projects coming in from our applications now as the issues, the regulatory issues and issues related to climate change are really making the environment much more complicated. And we are really interested in working with organizations to help them solve the problem. And we work with regional groups that are newly formed. So it doesn't even have to be an existing group, but if there's a new group that's going to be formed, as long as there is a clear cash flow source of repayment to cover the loan, we're very flexible on how that loan would be structured. You can sign up for our newsletter and receive information regularly, including our loan announcements, which might give you, even some more interest in working with us. That is my presentation today. And I really hope that I hear from some of you. If you email us, I will likely be the one that will follow up with you. So I hope to be speaking to you all.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Okay, Joe Favallaro is going to give some closing remarks. I want to thank.
We have one
there is
question
one
back here.
question. I'm sorry.
Hi, this is I'm Martha Morgan from the Nashua River Watershed Association. We are a donor basin to the MWRA, and we really appreciate everything that MWRA has done to conserve water, so they're able to provide it to the communities that need it for the emerging contaminants. And we're especially very sympathetic to the Ipswich River Watershed Association's issues. But we were hoping that with the 3 studies that have been done for the North and the South and the West, that there's some study being done for the donor basin as well. Our watershed is, a big donor basin because we have the Wachusett Reservoir in our watershed. We have 2 communities that are looking to potentially join, which is great. And my apologies to Mary. I didn't mean to. This isn't about the financial issues, but so we're just hoping that a good study is done for the Nashua River watershed, where a regulation that's 127 years old is regulating how much water goes down the river. And if all these communities come online, with demands for more water that come from the west. That those communities are, all their needs are met, but also the need for the water in the river is also met. And I understand that a lot more water has been, managed and put down the river more recently because of new improvements to the discharge, but the regulation is very variable. So from one day we could have 10 million gallons, next day 100 million gallons. So we just want to see what the effects are on that. So I know with the Interbasin Transfer Act, that will be looked at. So thank you very much.
Good comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, closing remarks. Joe.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank all of our speakers. I think they did a heck of a job. I think they've brought this issue from many different facets and many different geographical areas into focus. I do want to recognize Mr. Taverner for his hosting and his MC. Appreciate that, Mr. Taverner. A couple of the words that I heard out of the presentations today was one of conversation, the starting of a conversation. Another one was there's an opportunity. And again, and underscoring there's some real issues that need to be addressed. And as I said, our speakers spoke to all of them. I mean, back about a year ago, the advisory board put forward an op-ed, and lo and behold, the Boston Globe did pick up on it, that really spoke about a regional approach. We then, as an organization, took that next step, and in good faith to show that how important this issue was to us, began the dialogue and discussion amongst the advisory board members to talk about the entrance fee and its impacts and and how it could play into a regional solution. And we as an organization voted a waiver on the entrance fee, and the board of directors also moved on that. And all of these steps are put in place so that an event like today, with all of the diverse individuals that are here and all the diverse organizations, can begin to have that conversation. We have long said that a regional approach for water clearly is a win for the environment. It's a win for the communities dealing with issues like PFAS. It's a win for areas of the Commonwealth and communities looking for economic growth. And yes, and of course, it is the MWRA Advisory Board. It's a win for MWRA communities and its ratepayers. So I'm hoping today is not the last, but the first of many discussions as we move forward to see what role the MWRA can play as it's already done as a regional supplier of water and expanding that role. So stay tuned, stay active, stay involved, and stay talking to one another. So with that, before we bring you to lunch, I do want to recognize, beyond clearly the speakers, our host, as I already said, I do want to recognize all of you and thank you for being here today, taking up half of your Monday and asking questions and listening, and hopefully going forth back into your regions and your communities to keep this conversation going. I do want to recognize Boston College. Boston College has been a phenomenal friend of the advisory board. I think as Father Leahy outlined earlier, this is the third time that we have asked Boston College and worked with Boston College, and thank you again. And beyond Father Leahy, Tom Keaty and Jean Levesque and Devana Wong and Kyle Hanscom and our streaming service from Damon Mulfitz, all are intricate parts, and well beyond my ability to explain that the streaming will be where you can go back and take a look at the entire morning as well as sections within that. Don't ask me how, but you will be able to, and my fine staff, who I next want to recognize, Matt and James, who were an integral part of making sure today worked. And an additional shout out to Matt, because for many of you who now know, I will be retiring in June, and I'm pleased to mention that Matt will be coming in as the executive director, so that you will be well served moving forward when I leave in June. So with all that, and of course, the MWRA and you know, we work very closely with Fred and his team and Becky on this work. So like I said, for today, it's the start, hopefully, of a good conversation that results we all will be happy with. So now the business of the rest of the day. There are box lunches in the back. Please take one and stay here and enjoy it, or take it with you as you go on to your next activities of the day. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, if you drove, you took a receipt with you. What Matt, James, and I, and if Matt and James, if you don't know them, if they'll wave, what we have is a ticket that allows you to not have to pay for parking. So please, before you leave, search out one of us, and you know, we'll gladly give you one of these. So for today, I think, Mr. Chairman, this is the end of the formal piece of it, and enjoy your lunch. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you, speakers. Thank you all. Thank you for your patience.